Biloxi, Mississippi. A quiet southern town with a burning core of corruption. In 1987, its secret burst violently to the surface, leaving 2 prominent citizens dead and ripping the top off a grand conspiracy.
On Mississippi's Gulf Coast, a judge and his politician wife are murdered in their home. The killer left few clues. It looked like a professional hit, and the investigation led nowhere. But the FBI refused to give up. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Until we could prove that federal laws had been broken, our hands were tied. It would take years to break the conspiracy of silence and reveal the tangled tale of corruption.
Biloxi, Mississippi. Monday, September 14th, 1987. It was a typically warm summer night in this quiet Gulf Coast town. The workday was over, and most residents had retreated to the tranquility of their homes. Like most of their neighbors, State Circuit Court Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were unwinding after a long day. Vincent Sherry was a prominent judge in Biloxi. Margaret was making plans to run for mayor. Both were fixtures at Biloxi's social and community functions. They were a happy couple who had raised 3 grown children. Tomorrow they planned to visit their daughter out of state. Their life together seemed ideal. They were just settling in for the night when an unexpected visitor came to the door.
What are you doing here with that? How do you look out?
And brought their perfect world to an end. The Sherrys were supposed to be with their daughter, so no one realized anything was wrong until 2 days later when the judge failed to show up in court on Wednesday, September 16th. Calls to the Sherrys' home went unanswered.
I'm sorry we can't take your call, but leave your message after the beep.
His colleagues at the court phoned Pete Halat, Vincent Sherry's friend and former law partner.
Morning, Pete Halat.
But he hadn't seen or heard from the judge either.
Well, he's supposed to be in court.
When did he leave?
I don't know.
All right, I'll send
No,
somebody
wait,
out to
you let me call him at home and I'll figure out where he is.
All right.
After he left a concerned message on the Sherry's answering machine, Halat felt he'd better check on his friend personally.
I got the machine. Judge, it's Pete. They're looking for you in court. Is everything okay?
On his way out, he asked his junior partner, Charles Legier, to ride with him.
Charlie, hold on, time to settle up. But I need some help, so let's go.
Listen, I'll give you a call back, okay? Yeah, bye-bye.
I figure if we go together, the two of us will find.
As they drove, Legier tried to make conversation.
Finding out the lawyers.
Halat seemed distant, perhaps concerned about the judge. Both of the Sherry's cars stood in the driveway.
Well, the car's here.
I don't like it. Well, his car's here. He's supposed to be in court.
Halat asked Legier to go to the house, while he asked a neighbor if she'd seen the couple.
Just go ahead.
Legier rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He saw that the last 2 morning newspapers hadn't been picked up.
Pete Halak. I'm a partner.
The neighbor told Halat she hadn't seen the Sherrys for a couple of days, which she thought was odd since both of their cars were in the driveway. When Legier tried the Sherry's door, he found it unlocked. Something wasn't right.
Hey, Pete! Pete!
That's unusual.
Yeah, I was just knocking on it and the door opened up.
Halat, concerned by the open door, cautiously stepped inside. A few steps in, he made the gruesome discovery. Judge Sherry had been gunned down in his own home.
What's wrong?
They called the police. Authorities arrived to find the body of Vincent Sherry at the front of the house. In the back bedroom, they discovered Margaret. Because the couple was so prominent, the murder investigation became top priority. Detectives contacted the FBI's Biloxi field office. Though the FBI would not yet be officially involved, they offered the use of their agents and forensic laboratory. Inside, the police began scouring the crime scene for clues. They conducted blood spatter analysis to determine projectile angles. If they could figure out where the murderer had stood when he fired the shots, they might be able to reconstruct the crime.
Okay.
Inspector Robert Burris, a crime technician with the Biloxi Police Department, helped process the scene. He discovered a possible clue in the den.
There was blood trailing from his feet, actually going down between his legs a little ways, back to where he was laying. There was blood spatter on a double sliding glass door that was right beyond his head. And further examination in this room, I found some small pieces of foam rubber.
Burris didn't see where the foam rubber could have come from.
3 shell casings, you want to get those?
A search of the house led him to one conclusion.
Now this foam rubber had to have been brought into the house. We examined every piece of material in this house, in every room of the house, all pillows, mattresses, everything else. There's no foam rubber tore up in this house. It was brought into the house. It does have gunshot residue on it. And basically about the only way it can get there is for a bullet to be fired through it.
For Burris, the significance of the foam rubber was obvious. The killer had used a homemade silencer. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, but found none of any value. They found 9 spent .22 caliber shell casings from a semi-automatic pistol, as well as the bullets used to murder the Sherrys. The position of the shells indicated that the shots had been fired in rapid succession. But most striking was how well the killer had covered his tracks. Nothing at the scene pointed to the killer's identity. He did his job well, and his mission was clear.
The lack of evidence in this house, such as items stolen, a struggle occurring, the absence of forced entry, no ransacking going on in the house whatsoever. A person came there for one thing, that was to kill the two Sherrys.
Special Agent Keith Bell from the Biloxi FBI field office agreed that this was a professional job. The Sherrys had been assassinated.
The crime scene appeared to be very limited as far as evidence remaining, which meant it was well planned, well executed, and professionally done. A small caliber weapon had been used. The foam rubber indicated that perhaps a silencer had also been used, and the Sherrys had been shot in the head, so it seemed to be a very professional job.
A multi-agency task force was assembled with Special Agent Keith Bell among its members. Investigators would spend days processing the crime scene. They grappled with a single question. Why had the Sherrys been murdered?
That was one of the main questions, that being why were both Judge Sherry and Margaret Sherry murdered? Because it was fairly obvious that Judge Sherry could have been killed during his morning or afternoon jogs around the neighborhood. So it was a real mystery why Margaret had been killed.
Investigators believed the answer might lie in the controversy over Biloxi's future. Some civic leaders hoped to transform the sleepy southern town on Mississippi's Gulf Coast into a flashy resort where casinos would attract tourist dollars. But with strip clubs already established in town, Margaret Sherry felt Biloxi's small-town charms were threatened. And the casinos would attract a criminal element. As a candidate for mayor, she had made powerful political enemies by trying to keep gambling out. Agent Bell wondered if Margaret was killed to silence her protests.
Margaret had been so outspoken politically in the community. She was known to be anti-gambling. And if elected mayor in 1989, she had planned to close down the remaining strip clubs in Biloxi. So there was always the possibility that she might have been the target, rather than Judge Sherry.
The task force would investigate Margaret's political enemies, but first, they'd question the Sherrys' friends and neighbors. Someone in the neighborhood must have seen something. But even people who'd known the Sherrys for years were reluctant to talk, fearing the specter of Biloxi's emerging criminal underworld.
The Sherry murders brought a dark cloud over the city of Biloxi. Many of the citizens in Biloxi were afraid to openly express their opinions. They saw that Margaret Sherry, who had been quite vocal and quite outspoken in political circles, had ended up dead, as had her prominent husband, Judge Sherry. So many citizens after these murders were hesitant even to be interviewed by FBI agents or by local police officers because they basically did not want their names tied into anything to do with this case.
If people wouldn't talk to the authorities, perhaps they would talk to Lynn Sposito, the Sherry's daughter. After being notified of her parents' murders, Lynn rushed to Biloxi from her home in North Carolina. Determined to find justice, she questioned everyone in the neighborhood. One family friend gave her a crucial piece of information. He described a suspicious car and driver in the neighborhood on the night of the murders. She took the lead to the police.
They identified a man who had seen a suspicious Ford Fairmont driving in front of the Sherry home on Monday night, September 14th, 1987.
Investigators tried to determine the identity of the driver based on the witness's description. Their search came up empty. But a few days later, not far from the Sherry's home, investigators found an abandoned car, a Ford Fairmont. A check on the vehicle's identification number showed it had been reported stolen the day before the murders. Police also learned that the tags on the car were not registered to the car. Realizing that this vehicle was probably the killer's getaway car, investigators towed it to a police garage to examine it further. Somewhere in the car, they hoped to find a key to the killer's identity. Less than a week after the brutal murders of Biloxi couple Vince and Margaret Sherry, investigators received their first promising lead. They recovered an abandoned car, matching the one witnesses described seeing the night of the murders. After contacting Agent Keith Bell about the discovery, investigators processed the car for clues. Inspector Robert Burris found something peculiar.
I was processing this vehicle, and one of the things I noted, the dome light had been dismantled and the bulb taken out of it. In other words, if you open the door, you ain't got no light. Both of the sun visors were in the down position. Whether you're riding around daytime or nighttime, you ain't gonna be able to see the people's face in it very well.
Investigators believed more than ever that this was the car used by the Sherry's killer. Anything found inside it was labeled, packaged, and shipped to the FBI labs in Washington, D.C. But FBI lab examiners would find nothing of evidentiary value. After Agent Bell arrived, he examined the license tag more closely. He discovered it had its own story to tell.
It was determined that the tag on the Ford Fairmont had been stolen from an abandoned vehicle in 1984, actually 3 years before these murders occurred. So what it meant was someone had removed the license plate, likely in 1984, had kept the license plate, and then when this major crime in the city of Biloxi was to occur, they pulled it off the shelf, so to speak.
With no other solid evidence, investigators hoped that following the trail of the stolen tag might lead to the killer. It was traced to an apartment complex where the original car had been abandoned 3 years earlier. Investigators contacted the apartment manager, who told them that prior to having the vehicle towed, he called a friend to come and strip it for parts. The manager's friend was a man that agents knew by name and reputation. Biloxi locksmith Lenny Sweatman. He was the last person to be seen near the car. Sweatman belonged to a loosely organized group of criminals the FBI was investigating in connection with another case. The group was known as the Dixie Mafia. FBI agent Keith Bell had connected the car used in the Sherry killings to Lenny Sweatman. Now, Bell wondered if the Dixie Mafia was linked to the Sherry murders. If Sweatman had a part in it, Bell believed that other Dixie Mafia members couldn't be far behind. He began looking into Sweatman's associates.
What that meant to us immediately, those of us familiar with the criminal associations on the coast, was that if Lenny Sweatman was involved in getting the tag for the hit car, then quite likely his close personal friend and longtime associate Mike Gillich, the strip club owner in Biloxi, might also be involved in these murders.
That's all right.
Sometimes you know how it is. Oh, thanks.
Oh, beer.
All right.
Gillich, who owned 3 strip clubs in Biloxi, was well known to local law enforcement. He was currently under investigation by the FBI in connection with a Dixie Mafia operation known as the Lonely Hearts Scam.
See, he gets to him.
But Special Agent Bell needed a thread that connected the two investigations together. He started by familiarizing himself with the Lonely Heart scam. It was run out of Angola prison in Louisiana by a man named Kirksey Nix, the incarcerated kingpin of the Dixie Mafia.
No, the first model.
Nix would run ads in gay magazines, asking for money to help fictional gay men get out of trouble with the law. Through the scam, Nix was hoping to generate enough money to solve his own legal problems. He was serving a life sentence for murder.
From his jail cell at Angola, he coordinated what we've been referring to as the homosexual scam, which generated hundreds of thousands of dollars from individuals around the country, as well as some people in Canada. With this money, he intended to buy his way out, or attempt to buy his way out, of his Louisiana prison sentence.
Believing that they were helping gay men out of trouble, people who read the magazine ads would wire or mail money to a nearby Western Union. Nix would then call his contact on the outside, Mike Gillich.
Yes.
Gillich would then dispatch his bagman to retrieve the money.
Right. See you later.
Gillich made sure that the scam money was distributed to Dixie Mafia members and safely stashed away for Kirksey Nix.
Take care.
In the coming months, investigators developed more evidence in the Lonely Heart scam, but still had no direct link between these conspirators and the Sherry's killers. A year into the investigation, the murder case threatened to stall.
Hi.
Come in.
As the years stretched to 16 months, the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, grew increasingly frustrated. In January 1989, she hired a private investigator to rev up the inquest into her parents' murder.
He said he could make out the man.
And I'll give him a call, and I'll be on this case this afternoon.
The family had wanted very much to have a quick resolution to the case, but by early 1989, there'd still been no arrest. And of course, at this point, the FBI had not formally entered the case.
Nice to see you. Thank you for seeing
The lack of
me.
official FBI involvement hampered Bell's investigation.
Lynn Posito's hired me.
So when the private investigator paid him a visit, Bell welcomed his assistants, hoping they could share information. The two were old acquaintances from the private investigator's days in law enforcement. Since Agent Bell was unable to act officially, the private investigator would pursue a lead that looked promising. He would interview another Angola inmate. The private investigator and Bell hoped the inmate at Angola could finally link the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders.
He met with all the right people, and because of his knowledge of the Dixie Mafia and from what he had learned from law enforcement authorities on the coast, he did go over to Angola and did talk to the right person over there.
The inmate's name was Bobby Joe Fabian. He was another known member of the Dixie Mafia, doing time for kidnapping and shooting a state trooper. Fabian claimed he had not been involved in the Sherry murders, but he had learned that fellow inmate Kirksey Nix had been. Fabian told the private investigator that Nix had had Judge Sherry killed because Sherry had allegedly stolen money from Nix's Lonely Heart scam. That wasn't all. He said Nix had been told of the theft by none other than Pete Halat, Sherry's former law partner. Halat, the man who had delivered the eulogy at the Sherry's funeral, was now implicated in their murders. Halat officially represented Nix on legal matters, but Fabian said Halat's role in the Lonely Heart scam was criminal, not legal. Halat was one of the people receiving money from Nix for safekeeping through Mike Gillich's bagman.
Don't forget to pick up next week at the other place.
And the ties between the outlaw and the lawyer went deep. Kirksey Nix's girlfriend and accomplice, LaRae Sharp, worked in Halat's office.
Where's he from?
Fabian said both LaRae Sharp and Pete Halat were stashing money from the scam in a safe deposit box for Kirksey Nix. And he said the amount had reached 6 figures. Thanks to Fabian, the link between the murders and the Lonely Heart scam had been made. And not only had Fabian given investigators a possible motive for the killings, he was also able to supply the name of the alleged hitman, an ex-con named John Ransom, who was believed to be living in Georgia. But tracking down Ransom would take time.
Anytime law enforcement people get together and start talking about notorious Dixie Mafia members, John Ransom comes up quite early in the conversation. He's a longtime alleged hitman for the Dixie Mafia.
In August of 1989, 2 years after the Sherry murders, Agent Bell now had enough evidence to warrant a full FBI investigation into the killings. Accompanied by the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, he approached the United States Attorney and the FBI with a demand to officially open the case.
So with the tying in of the scam to the murders, we knew we had some federal violations involved. We have wire fraud, we had mail fraud, and we perhaps had a hitman traveling from Georgia to Mississippi to kill the Sherrys. It was decided to open an official FBI investigation and join with local authorities in the investigation.
By now, however, suspect Pete Halat, Judge Sherry's former law partner, had been elected mayor of Biloxi. With a key suspect in such a high position, investigators encountered new roadblocks.
It became very difficult for the FBI to share all of its information with the local authorities. We are not saying that the local police were corrupt. What we are saying is that Mayor Halat put his own people in as Director of Public Safety and as Police Chief, so we were somewhat circumspect on what we shared with local authorities during that time period.
In August of 1989, as investigators attempted to unravel the truth about the Sherry's murders, informant Bobby Joe Fabian made a surprise move. He told his story about the Sherry murders to the TV news. Fabian hoped that by bringing attention to himself, Kirksey Nix would be less likely to have him killed for cooperating with authorities. Along with the report, the station broadcast a mugshot of John Ransom, the alleged hitman in the Sherry case. When Charles Legier, Pete Halat's junior partner, saw the photo, it surprised him. He recalled seeing Ransom outside the Sherry Halat law offices a few weeks before the murders. Legier shared his information with the task force. Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department took Legier's statement.
Legier said the reason he remembered Ransom was Ransom stepped off of a curb and came up to him and asked him where's Vince Sherry's office at. When Legier was interviewed, he recalled there was something unusual about the way Ransom stepped off of the curb. Ransom had a prosthesis on one leg.
Investigators learned that Ransom was now in a Georgia prison, serving time for another murder. When questioned about the Sherry murders, he refused to cooperate. As Cook further questioned Legier about the day he and Halat had found the bodies, an important detail emerged. Legier remembered that Halat had walked into the Sherry's living room, seen Judge Sherry's body, and said, "Vince and Margaret are dead." Cook relayed this to Agent Bell.
What was interesting was that Margaret's body was in the far back bedroom of the residence, and according to Chuck Legier, Pete Halat did not have time other than to briefly enter the front of the house and would have no way of knowing that Margaret's body was also in the very back bedroom.
In October of 1989, 2 years after the murders, Agent Bell knew Halat was involved, but he still lacked enough evidence for an arrest. Even so, he felt it was time to confront Mayor Halat. It would be a quiet warning, man to man.
And I let Mayor Halat know that I thought his knowledge of the Sherry murders was much greater than what he had shared with law enforcement authorities up to that point. And I recall also telling him that the FBI would continue working on this case until it was totally solved. My recollection is he smiled and did not have much else to say.
As a lawyer, Halat knew Bell would need more concrete evidence in order to secure a conviction. What he likely didn't realize was the depth of Bell's commitment to bring him to justice. Three years had passed since Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were murdered in their Biloxi, Mississippi home. FBI Special Agent Keith Bell had connected the killings to members of the Dixie Mafia and to Judge Sherry's friend and one-time law partner, Pete Halat. The alleged triggerman, John Ransom, was refusing to talk. In January of 1990, Agent Bell and Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department drove to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary to question another possible accomplice.
This is Special Agent.
A man named Bill Rhodes. Rhodes, a known associate of John Ransom, was willing to cooperate. He told them that in early 1987, Ransom had contacted him about driving the getaway car in a crime to take place in southern Mississippi. Ransom had said a judge would be murdered and that the pay was $10,000.
There were certain promises made to Rhodes by Ransom that I know certain people in Biloxi that if you'll help me on this and you'll have the run of Biloxi anytime you want it.
So in March of 1987, Rhodes went to Biloxi and met with Ransom and a man named Pete. It was Pete who specifically asked Rhodes and Ransom to do the hit. Rhodes said he also met with Mike Gillich, the Biloxi strip club owner, who would supply the money once the hit was done. But 5 months later, before they could do the job, Rhodes was arrested on an unrelated bank robbery charge, and Ransom got cold feet, afraid Rhodes would turn on him. The information helped the case inch forward, but Agent Bell and Officer Cook still felt that Ransom held the missing pieces. Another year would pass without much progress. In late 1990, the investigators went to the Bostic Correctional Institute in Georgia, where Ransom was serving time. Finally, Ransom agreed to talk. He admitted that he delivered a .22 caliber pistol to LaRae Sharp, Kirksey Nix's girlfriend. But Ransom insisted that he did not do the job. Based on what Ransom said, LaRae's involvement was starting to look bigger than simply stashing scam money in a safe deposit box.
All finished?
Finished, thank you.
Through his contact with Sharp, Nix learned that the investigation was heating up. He worried that his girlfriend might talk, so he tried to head off the problem by putting out a contract on her life. But in late 1990, Agent Bell arrested her for her participation in the murders, inadvertently saving her from Nix's gunman. During a polygraph test, Sharp denied her involvement in the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders. But the machine called her bluff. When Bell and his team added her statements to their existing stacks of evidence, they were ready to bring indictments against several key players. Mike Gillich, John Ransom, LaRae Sharp, and Kirksey Nix were charged as conspirators in the Sherry murders. Notably missing from the list was Pete Halat. The case against Halat would have to wait until they had enough evidence for a murder conviction. For now, the FBI would look to convict the others on conspiracy to commit murder.
So many of the questions came up, why didn't y'all indict Pete Halat early on when you indicted everybody else? Well, at the time, we didn't have the hard evidence that you would have to arrest a mayor and prosecute him.
The conspiracy trial produced several key witnesses that would help investigators piece together the complex scheme.
Mr. Gant, you stated that all these people here murdered.
Robbie Gant, Gillich's bagman for the Lonely Heart scam, testified for the prosecution. His testimony helped prosecutors link the Sherry murders to the scam. All 4 defendants were found guilty. Nix was given 15 years in addition to the life sentence he was already serving for murder. Gillich also received a 15-year prison term. Ransom got 10 years, and LaRae Sharp 1.
I pay you for it. Get your hands on order in the court.
With these conspirators behind bars and the Lonely Heart scam no longer operational, Bell moved on to his next objective.
We decided not to end the Sherry investigation after the 1991 initial convictions because at that time we had not proven who had actually shot the Sherrys, and also Pete Halat had not been indicted or convicted at that point. And we all felt strongly that Pete Halat had played a major role in the scam and in the murder plot. So we were determined to continue the investigation to see if we could get enough evidence to indict and convict Mr. Halat and the actual shooter.
In late July of 1992, Agent Bell got the break he was looking for. Following the conspiracy trial, Mike Gillich was desperate to find a way out of prison. He contacted one of his associates in Biloxi and asked him to approach Robbie Gant with an offer.
Okay, well, whatever you say.
Gant told Agent Bell about it.
And the associate had offered Robbie Gant $20,000 if Gant would recant his testimony against Gillich and sign a false affidavit stating that he had been threatened by me to testify against Gillich, to testify falsely against Gillich.
Gant agreed to wear a wire and get the offer from Gillich's accomplice on tape. Gant met with him in Mississippi. This time, Gant's tape was rolling when Gillich's associate reiterated the bribe. Gant accepted as Bell had instructed. Now, Bell had the evidence he needed to turn up the heat on Gillich. Just the man who could tell the story from the inside. By 1993, 6 years after the double murder of Vince and Margaret Sherry, FBI agent Keith Bell had put 4 members of the Dixie Mafia behind bars. But he still had no formal murder convictions against those involved. And Mayor Pete Halat, the suspected mastermind of the case, was still free and running the city of Biloxi. In fact, the year before, Mayor Halat had broken ground on the city's first big casino.
The victory for our town and our people.
The press still hounded Halat about his involvement in the Sherry murders, but he remained adamant about his innocence. Bell continued to work his plan. He used the bribe Robert Gant had recorded on tape to level another charge against Mike Gillich, already in jail. Now Bell indicted Gillich for witness bribery and witness tampering for trying to buy off Gant. And that did the trick.
No doubt the most important turning point was in October of 1993 when Mike Gillich finally decided to cooperate and tell the story of this whole case from an insider's point of view. And that's what really allowed us to bring final resolution to this investigation.
After the years of painstaking work Bell had spent on the case, it was a satisfying moment. Finally, it seemed his patience and ingenuity were paying off. Gillich was in no hurry to accrue more jail time. Bell's relentless pressure had persuaded him to cut a deal before the bribery trial even began. The Dixie Mafia member would tell what he knew about the murders.
Mr. Gillich has...
Maybe now, Bell could get the convictions he knew were long overdue. But for a career criminal like Mike Gillich, adjusting to life on the right side of the law wasn't easy. At first, he tried to bluff his way out.
Of course, it always takes some time, a period of weeks, to develop some degree of trust and to be able to communicate with someone like this who, for the first time, has decided to leave his lifelong role as a criminal and start cooperating with the FBI.
When deception didn't work, Gillich had no alternative. He had to tell the truth. Now, for the first time, Bell heard the story from an inside source. Gillich knew all the details.
Mike was the center point. Mike knew Kirksey Nix. Mike knew Pete Halat for years. And in fact, when Kirksey Nix was looking for an attorney over in the coast area to represent him on various matters, Mike Gillich introduced Nix into Pete Halat.
He confirmed that Pete Halat was indeed behind the plan to murder the Sherrys, and that the plot grew directly out of the Lonely Heart scam of Angola prison inmate Kirksey Nix. Some months before the Sherrys' deaths, Halat had closed the safe deposit box he and Nix's girlfriend LaRae Sharp had access to, effectively cutting off her access to the money. He then transferred the money into a box only he and Judge Sherry could use. Motivated by greed, he stole $100,000 cash from there. As Nix's trusted accomplice, Halat could blame the theft on Judge Sherry. Next, he went to Mike Gillich with news of the theft.
Mr. Gillich stated that Pete Halat approached Mr. Gillich himself in late 1986 and told Mr. Gillich that much of the money was missing, supposedly around $100,000. and Mr. Halat blamed Judge Sherry for taking the money. Mr. Halat knew that Kirksey Nix would be very furious about this.
It is not known who ordered Margaret's death, but as a fierce opponent of corruption, she posed a threat to the underworld forces hoping to control Biloxi. With Margaret dead, Halat could be free to run the town.
I got the contacts. I've already started the ball too.
Gillett said that he and Halat planned the murders. Ransom and Rhodes provided the murder weapon. But when they passed on doing the hit, Gillett found a replacement. A Texas-based petty criminal named Thomas Holcomb. Holcomb would be paid $20,000 to murder Judge Sherry and his wife. Gillett had also helped provide the car with the help of locksmith Lenny Sweatman.
Stay away from me! I didn't do anything!
In October of 1996, agents arrested hitman Thomas Holcomb in Texas on murder charges. That same month also saw the arrest that Agent Bell had anticipated and worked 9 years to achieve.
I'm an innocent man, and you're going to put the cuffs on me?
Let me read you your rights.
The arrest of Pete Halat for the murders of the Sherrys.
You can, anything you say can and will be held against you.
Kirksey Nix and LaRae Sharp were indicted on 52 counts, including fraud, money laundering, and murder. Halat was tried and convicted in the summer of 1997, a full decade after the crimes were committed. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Also tried and convicted were Kirksey Nix and Thomas Holcomb, the hitman. Both were sentenced to life. LaRae Sharp, Nix's girlfriend, got 5 years.
I think a lot of citizens in Biloxi now realize that there are a lot of dedicated professional law enforcement people who will do everything they can to protect the community and work hard to solve major crimes. Perhaps the legacy, you might say, of the case for the criminal element is that they realize after seeing this case that they can commit a crime one day and think they're getting away with it a year later, but it could come back 10 years later and get them.
While the Sherry's killers were finally brought to justice, Margaret Sherry's dream of a Biloxi free of gambling was never realized. Instead, Biloxi has become a resort town filled with casinos and neon lights. The sleepy southern town is gone forever, along with the woman who lost her life trying to save it.
One family.
Oh my God. Possible 45.
2 horrible tragedies. That's pretty dark stuff. at sea and on land.
My father, he is in bed and someone shot him in the head.
Do you remember what you noticed?
First thing I thought is this crime scene is staged.
Linda always felt that she deserved more than what she was getting, because she and my dad were always butting heads.
So we've got no weapons, we've got no enemies that we know of.
And no more details, because she disappears.
I told her not to go on that boat.
So she went out of the way to give them information in case something happened.
Yes, indeed. It's just getting wilder and wilder because in the middle of the ocean, nobody can hear you scream.
Every fisherman has a story about the one that got away. And this is Nathan Carmen's. The 22-year-old was set to meet up with his mom, Linda, for a late-night fishing trip out here off the coast of Rhode Island. But for Linda, the trip was less about catching bass and more about bonding with her son.
Fishing was one of the things that brought them together, and that was Linda really giving herself to the experience because Linda hated fishing. Linda didn't eat fish, but she thought this is the only thing that made Nathan happy, and she wanted to connect with her son in any way possible.
That was a common occurrence. They used to go either weekly or sometimes bi-weekly.
Nathan and his mother, they'd taken a boating course. They had some fundamental knowledge, but they stuck pretty close to land and were fishing for stripers and blues.
Nathan's experience was, I would characterize him as a recreational fisherman.
Mom and son planned to cruise toward Block Island in this boat which Nathan recently bought, one that just passed inspection by the Coast Guard a month earlier. That's comforting to Linda, who has a better to be safe than sorry approach when it comes to boating.
So she begins to tell her friends about this fishing trip and shares information as to where they're going to be at specific times during that trip.
Linda is so cautious, she even texts photos of the boat and its registration number to her friends so it could be easily spotted if the boat breaks down.
You're relying on your engine, you're relying on electronics to get you there.
On a starless night with calm seas, the two depart Ram Point Marina in Rhode Island at about 11 p.m. Linda texts her friends that the journey is underway. The boat is never seen or heard from again.
One of my sisters had called me and said Linda and Nathan are missing. And I kind of freaked out.
Linda's friends begin to worry on Sunday of that weekend because Linda had claimed that she was going to come back and text them when she arrived.
Linda always did a float log. And, you know, when Linda got back, she'd call her friend Sharon, and Sharon never received the phone call.
That's when two of her best friends reach out to authorities and say, something has happened. There are two missing boaters off the coast of Rhode Island. We need your help.
It started out as a typical missing persons investigation, which is not criminal in nature. Our first order of business is naturally to find the missing people, gather the facts and circumstances to try to determine how they potentially went missing. Oftentimes people are not missing, they're just overdue.
The U.S. Coast Guard quickly begins a search over the Atlantic.
The United States Coast Guard really deployed every available resource that they had to find this missing boat. They deployed fixed-wing aircraft, reconnaissance planes, Coast Guard cutters.
Given the nature of the success rate that the Coast Guard has with search and rescue, I was very, very shocked that they were not finding anything.
We defer to the Coast Guard for search and rescue efforts. In that respect, they were really scouring the ocean, and the search efforts came up unsuccessful.
I think it was day 6 that the Coast Guard made a decision to call off any additional search. And at that point, they had covered 64,000 square nautical miles, which is a massive, massive search area.
So the Orient Lucky, which is a Chinese cargo ship, they were out around 115 miles south of Martha's Vineyard as they were shifting ballast in their ship.
The Orient Lucky routinely travels the high seas picking up cargo, but this time it will make headlines for picking up something else. Lucky indeed.
They saw what they believed was an orange ball popping out of the ocean about 1 square nautical mile from where the cargo ship was positioned at the time. And when they got a little closer, they realized it was a life raft. And inside that life raft was a figure, a young man standing and waving a flag in distress. Getting this large freighter close enough to not kill Nathan Carmen, but save Nathan Carmen was a challenge. And I think the captain made a certain maneuver that allowed them to get a little closer to Nathan where they could deploy a life ring, and the life ring landed several feet away from where the life raft was. So Nathan then had to jump out of the life raft and swim.
The stunned crew members document the rescue with a series of photos and videos. Once he's on board, Nathan is offered hot soup, water, and dry clothes.
I got a call from my supervisor saying that Nathan had been recovered by a passing ship. I was shocked and I was thankful that there was a survivor.
The rescue, a kind of needle in a haystack, becomes international news.
And a man lost at sea with his mother for 8 days has been found alive in good condition.
There were pictures of Nathan that were on the front page of newspapers all over the world, because everybody thought that this was a wild story.
Next tonight, here, the family mystery at sea. More than 100 miles from land, the discovery, and authorities asking what happened.
Nathan, this is United States Coast Guard, Boston. Over.
Mom and I, 2 people, myself and my mom, were fishing, and there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. I looked and saw a lot of water. The boat dropped out from under my feet. When I saw the life raft, I did not see my mom. Have you found her?
No, we haven't been able to find her yet.
Nathan Carmen is still on that freighter. He's expected to arrive in Boston tomorrow night.
So now we can start to maybe get some insight as to what transpired and why it transpired. But it was also concerning because Linda hadn't been recovered.
Happy to be back on land, but exhausted by his ordeal, Nathan heads home and asks for privacy.
I would just like to thank the public for their prayers and for their concern for both my mother and for myself.
It's not the first time this family has dealt with drama and tragedy.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
This is a nautical map. The area that Nathan departed from is right up here. His transit would have taken him down this body of water here. And that is the point in which one of the individuals traveling inbound observed Nathan and Linda on the boat. And that was the last time that anyone saw the boat.
In the days and weeks after his dramatic sea rescue, Nathan finds himself just as alone on land as he was at sea. And he feels like the media has gotten his story wrong. So he agrees to an interview with ABC News.
Well, it would be great to have people embracing you, saying, we're glad you're home, we're glad you're alive. It hasn't been that.
Loneliness seems to be Nathan's constant companion. He grew up an only child. His parents divorced when he was little. Kids made fun of him at school.
I heard people trying to imitate him or, try to make fun of the way he spoke. And I've definitely seen people mock the way he ran down the hallway.
I got the impression that a lot of people didn't try to talk to him, and maybe that kind of contributed to his loneliness or feeling isolated and uncomfortable being in crowds and with other people.
His best friend in the world was one who wouldn't judge him, a horse named Cruz.
Yes, I was very fortunate in that regard, and I was able to really form a strong bond emotionally.
Cruz and Nathan had a very tight bond. It was definitely his best friend, his confidant. I went to the stable once with Linda and Nathan. We were ready to leave the stable. I said, well, where's Nathan? Go on in and get Nathan. She's like, no, Nathan loves to spend time with Cruz alone before we leave. And he was there for probably a good half hour, if not longer, just spending time with Cruz in his stall.
But when Nathan is 17, that bond shatters. Cruz dies. Devastated, Nathan runs away from his Connecticut home. Nathan doesn't stop running until he reaches Virginia, 600 miles away. That's where a sheriff's deputy finds him.
Running away from home was something that I felt that I had to do at the time. I don't fully understand or comprehend that sitting here now.
A couple of interesting things Nathan had on him on his possession when he was found in Virginia. He had $4,000 in cash. That money had been given to him by his grandfather, but he also had a couple of photos of his horse, Cruz. And he had a Ziploc bag with some of the horse's hair in it.
His parents drive all night to Virginia to bring Nathan home.
Clark Carmen told me that Nathan had fled to a horse farm, or that's where he was supposed to be going, in Florida, because Nathan had told his father that that was a place that he could feel normal.
Nathan is diagnosed with Asperger's, which we now know as autism spectrum disorder. Social interactions and communication skills can be challenging.
I'm not someone who understands relationships or who's good about talking about emotions.
But Nathan does share a close relationship with his grandfather, John Chocolos, a wealthy real estate developer who made his fortune in the nursing home business.
My dad had 5 sisters and 4 daughters, and then he had his first grandchild. That I think Linda was really excited that she had a boy to bring into my dad's life.
And then Nathan comes along, and he's your uncle's first grandchild. He doted on him.
Right.
How excited was he to have a grandson?
I mean, there's not really even words for it. He had such great hopes for that kid.
Tell me about the daughters in the family.
I think they were all different individuals. Elaine was the oldest. The next one down was Linda. She was more like John personality-wise. Charlene is the next one down. Valerie's the youngest. I think she was kind of like the apple of John's eye.
My grandfather was the closest person to me. He was like a father to me, and I know I was like a son to him.
When it comes to business, Nathan, a teenager, has a pretty unusual role at his grandfather's company, one that requires him to look and listen closely.
John Chocolos brought Nathan to all of his business dealings because John Chocolos was hard of hearing, and Nathan was his both eyes and ears at every business meeting. They would consult each other after the business meetings were completed. So I think that, you know, John Chocolos was grooming Nathan to take over the family business.
I got the feeling that John had a very good relationship with him and was trying to cultivate that. Nathan was as introverted as John was extroverted, I think.
What was his relationship like as Nathan is growing up? You said there weren't enough words.
He kind of treated him the same way that he treated me when I was a kid. You know, I mean, he couldn't do enough for him. The only problem with it is that John always looked at a problem. If there's a problem, if you throw enough money at it, it's going to solve it.
John Chocolos doted on Nathan, gave him anything he wanted, whether it was a credit card or a new truck or a new apartment. There was nothing that Nathan needed because John was always there with his checkbook or his credit card to give Nathan anything he wanted.
With a support system like his granddad, Nathan's future could be limitless until one phone call changes everything.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
The front door was locked. Oh, my God.
Possible 45.
Oh, my God. I don't even know what to do. I don't even know where to look.
Windsor, Connecticut, a typical small town. Pretty nice community. You know, not a lot of crime. Murders in Windsor are very rare.
Not rare enough for the man living on Overlook Drive. John Chocolos was a self-made man here in Windsor, Connecticut, running his multi-million-dollar real estate business out of his modest home. That is until the morning of December 20th, 2013. Police arrive here after getting an urgent 911 call.
Okay, what's your emergency?
I came to check on my father to pick him up for an activity. He is in bed and someone shot him in the head.
Is he still alive?
I don't think so. I walked into the bedroom and there's blood all over the back wall.
When I saw the news and my dad being brought out, you know, in a body bag and them saying it was a murder, and I lost it. I lost it. I fell to the floor and I'm crying hysterically.
My name is Scott McGregor. In 2013, I was a detective for the Windsor Police Department. Mr. Chocolos was found in a bedroom on the upper part of the house. In his bed, we found him that he had been shot 3 times.
The scene says a lot to the detective, not for what's in the house, but for what isn't.
You obviously start looking for evidence, and when you can't find spent shell casings, once again, you go back to whoever did this, you know, took the time to retrieve those casings and not leave evidence behind. That kind of tells us that the person planned this out knew to cover their steps, which ultimately makes our investigation harder.
Sergeant Chris McKee also gets the call to head to Overlook Drive, a quiet street with a quiet resident who wasn't exactly well known around town. How did he fit into the community in terms of how he had accumulated his wealth? Was he kind of like a little local success story?
I gotta say, he ran in his circles and his business circles. He wasn't known in Windsor, you know, and I was very active in community roles in the department, and like I said, I wasn't aware of him until this investigation.
McKee walks into a bloody scene. You're looking around the room. Do you remember what you noticed?
A little further down from Mr. Chocolos' bedroom, there was a glass door, or a door with glass panes that led into the backyard. The officer and I observed that there was broken glass.
A break-in?
Well, it looked like it was meant to be a break-in, but looking at it, it was very clear that the glass had been punched from the wrong side, and it was very suspicious. First thing I thought is this crime scene is staged.
The recently widowed victim was known to keep cash in his house, but after the shots were fired, the gunman left. The money still there. Was there any sense that it had been ransacked or robbed?
There had been large sums of money in the house and other valuables, and honestly, nothing appeared touched. It told me that this was personal.
The devastated family speaks out on local news, hoping to catch a killer.
My father, while he lived a small life, he was a very large man. And to know him, you could never forget him.
Anyone could have done this.
This person killed at least once that we know of. This person's gotten away with murder. And chances are it will happen again.
When we start any murder investigation, we want to do a timeline. We want to start trying to find out who was with John.
My father, my mother passed November 21st. My father for 2 weeks was staying with one of us, or Linda was staying at my father's house.
Another curious thing about the home. It doesn't exactly look like a millionaire lives there. One of the victim's daughters explains why.
My father has an elaborate estate. I mean, the man's worth at least $40 to $50 million. I mean, it's huge. You wouldn't know it going into the house. That's the only reason why I'm bringing up my father's financial worth. Is because looking at this house, you would not know that he has a 25,000 square foot house up in New Hampshire.
You find out that this is a prominent businessman, a wealthy businessman.
Yep.
What does that say to you initially about this?
Kind of starts to focus investigators in on, was this financially motivated? Did this gentleman had a lot of money, a lot of properties? Did someone have something to gain financially from his death?
The videos of the Windsor police interviewing various family members have never been broadcast before.
Nathan and I went fishing. We went out of Point Judith, Rhode Island. Okay. So we went on a cod trip that left at 6 in the morning, got back into port at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
A long day.
We learned that John, the day before, the last person to see him was his grandson, Nathan Carmen. We learned that through talking to Nathan, talking to family.
Hey Nathan, what's your last name? My last name is spelled C-A-R-M-A-N.
We have to treat everyone as a possible suspect. Family, associates, people who worked in the office, neighbors, anything. Anyone could have done this.
Investigators asked Nathan about employees at Chocolos's company, and the grandson mentions one who, he says, complains about being overworked and underpaid.
Just that I'm underpaid, also the stress load. I have 101 things to do. I have to get all these papers in. Now you're asking me to do this and the other thing. So he would bitch and moan about that.
The bookkeeper is, in fact, stealing from the Chocolos's company.
So obviously he's someone we want to talk to.
Nathan begins outlining his final evening with his grandfather to investigators. It begins with dinner. He was going to come here and eat that night with Nathan.
That was the plan, and he wanted me to come too. Yeah. And, I said, look, you guys go do it. If I only knew what I knew, now.
After their meal, Nathan and his grandfather return to the Windsor home. At some point, John Chocolos gets a phone call and puts it on speaker.
I think that there's a real possibility that the person who called him may have been a mistress. I don't like saying that my grandfather was doing that, but I think there's that real possibility.
It wasn't one of your aunts?
No, it was not one of my aunts. It was not one of my aunts, no one in the family. Very young, 20, 30. And he then told that female voice to just wait. Hold on a second. He showed me to the door.
Nathan Carmen is correct. There is a young woman Chocolos has been talking to.
And she became a suspect. Did you go anywhere else that night or anything like that? Or did you just stay home?
No, I didn't sleep because I was where I had to be at. I was supposed to be at meet my mom at 3 o'clock. When I fall asleep, I have difficulty waking up. So I tried to stay awake. I did run out to Stop and Shop, and I got some ice cream for myself. I picked up a few AAA batteries because I was out of them, and then I headed home. Then I stayed until I went back out to meet my mom.
Investigators don't have much to go on, with the exception of some security camera footage, which they use to retrace the last days of John Chocolos's life. Like this casino video, where the 87-year-old is seen with a much younger woman. Will it provide investigators with answers? The Windsor Police Department may not know who killed John Chocolos yet, but they are beginning to understand who did not. Remember the woman Nathan heard on the phone? And the woman at the casino? They are one and the same.
So John Chocolos struck up a relationship with a 25-year-old woman over the course of a year.
She was an acquaintance of John who was going to the casino, staying overnight. The night of that homicide, she confirmed that she had talked to John, but she was kind of quickly dismissed as being involved.
Investigators have also tracked down that bookkeeper Nathan mentioned. His name is William Sati, and he too is cleared.
He had an alibi that night and was confirmed. I think he was actually out of the state at the time. I think we found him in Rhode Island.
While cleared as a suspect in the murder, Sati was later convicted of stealing some $400,000 from Chocolus' company.
But that's small change compared to the money the patriarch was handing over to family members every year.
One of the problem children was Linda. Linda was taking John's allowances and going off on spending sprees at casinos or going skiing or taking these lavish trips around the world.
Linda always felt that she deserved more than what she was getting. I don't know why she felt that way. I don't know, because she and my dad were always butting heads.
Father and daughter also butt heads over the way Nathan is being raised.
The relationship between John and Linda was always volatile, but one day it turned violent. And that was over Nathan's care. Nathan was put into a psychiatric hospital shortly after his horse, Cruz, had died. And the accusations begin to fly. Linda accuses John of smothering her son with all sorts of riches, and John is yelling at Linda, saying that she is a bad mother and that Nathan is normal and that Nathan should be treated as such. And at one point, John reaches across the table and grabs Linda by the hair and starts to pull it. So Linda swings and she starts to fight back at her father. And it's a combustible moment that probably lasted a minute plus. And they're swinging at each other, they're fighting each other. And the orderlies are summoned as well as the local police. And Linda is arrested right on the spot.
Linda chalks it up as two people cut from the same cloth.
I don't back down from my father. Yeah.
And that's just his personality not to back down.
Yeah,
Sure.
and it's not his personality back down either. So if anyone would have fought with him, you know, it would have been me.
Linda has spent many more years fighting to protect her son from those who might treat him unkindly.
I know he led a very lonely life. It's at the age where kids were being invited to birthday parties and, having play dates. And nobody was calling for Nathan to go to the birthday party. And, it was sad. And she hated that for her child. Any mother would hate it if her child wasn't included in anything. But yeah, it must have been hard for Linda not being able to fix that. Linda was a fixer. Linda had to fix things, or at least try to fix things, and she just could not fix that.
Linda and Nathan had a very unique and conflicted relationship. Nathan saw his mother as somebody who was incredibly domineering, and Linda was always trying to get him the therapy that she thought he needed. And I think Nathan wanted to get as far away from his mother as possible because Nathan didn't want to feel different from anybody else.
And with his grandfather, Nathan feels like a success. He learns about business, he's a confidant to John Chocolos, his college tuition is paid for, and so is the rent on his apartment and his credit card bills. Linda couldn't compete with that.
I think what it comes down to is Nathan's always felt torn between me and my father.
Picking sides.
Like he had to pick a side.
How's your relationship in general to your mother?
I did move out of our house and when we were not on good terms, but I since started speaking to her again. Probably about a year ago.
Did that concern you at all in terms of looking at him as a suspect, that maybe he might exhibit behavior that you wouldn't normally see, but he does have a disorder?
That was a concern of many of us, are the behaviors we're seeing, are the answers he's giving in that one interview that he did grant, are these more aligned with behaviors perhaps of someone who is on the autism spectrum? Or can we look at these for what we normally would kind of think, this is kind of sketchy, a little suspicious, we want to delve more into this.
Was your grandpa involved during that time?
Yes, my grandpa, he facilitated financially my ability to go off on her.
So for Linda, the recent fishing trips are a way of pulling her son back into her life. But now there's the murder of her father to deal with and lots of money at stake. Everybody is under the microscope.
Do you own any weapons?
No.
Anybody else in the family own any weapons?
No.
Anybody have access to any weapons? Anybody that knows anybody that has weapons? Nothing at all. Okay. So we've got no weapons, we've got no enemies we know of.
That we know of.
Do you own any firearms?
I do have an air gun. Okay. I'm not sure if that counts as a firearm, but
is it the only?
Yes, it is.
But after speaking with a long line of friends, family, and business associates, investigators are about to realize they've been lied to. In the wake of 87-year-old John Chocolos's brutal murder, investigators have few leads, with one notable exception: fragments of the bullets fired at the victim. There's hope that they could be traced back to a possible murder weapon. What kind of weapon was used to kill him?
It was believed to be a rifle because it was a .308 cartridge, a certain type of bullet.
And a ballistics test concludes the gun used was most likely a Sig Sauer rifle like this one.
But in the wake of the Newtown massacre, these types of weapons were illegal to own in Connecticut, where Chocolos was murdered.
The detectives focused a lot of their attention on New Hampshire. They scoured gun dealers, I think well over 600 gun dealers, looking for that Sig Sauer rifle.
Eventually, investigators make their way to a place called Shooter's Outpost and speak with salesman Jed Warner about recent purchases. He remembers an interaction with a customer just weeks earlier.
He definitely stood out because he looked like he came off like a construction site. His pants were dirty. He was wearing like a pair of like dirty boots, like a construction feel about him. We started talking about rifles and targeting. He said, actually, I'm very interested in the Sig Sauer 716.
It's an expensive rifle, retailing for almost $2,000. Jed says he suggested other options that were more economical for target shooting, but the buyer knows what he wants.
We do all the paperwork, do the background, he passes. He just kind of walked straight out, and that was the last we saw of him. 2 officers from the Windsor area were there, and then a local, like a Connecticut ATF agent. We had to go through all the stuff, try to figure out the day of sale.
And there they find it, a bill of sale for a Sig Sauer rifle. The name of the purchaser, Nathan Carmen.
And that became an incredible aha moment for investigators and potentially the smoking gun in this case.
After the discovery at Shooter's Outpost, Nathan is asked again about owning any guns.
And since, because I just wasn't feeling safe at home, I did buy a shotgun.
You did buy a shotgun?
That's correct.
Any other purchases of a firearm anytime?
No.
And that wasn't ever volunteered or brought up until investigators found this out-of-state bill of sale and then confronted Nathan with it.
And how did he respond?
Well, he acknowledged that he had bought this weapon. When asked about it, he said he lost it, and he didn't know where the gun was.
That had to be really a red flag for you all.
It was.
Most people don't lose those firearms or any firearm. But yeah, you don't normally hear, I don't know where it is.
And there was no report of him, making a report that it was stolen, lost, etc.
So what are you thinking at this point? You've been kind of connecting these dots.
Well, it gets better. There was at least 1 hour of unaccounted time during which Mr. Chocolos was shot that Nathan couldn't account for his time.
Linda arrives at this Home Depot parking lot at 3 a.m., where she and Nathan are set to meet up to go fishing. But Nathan is nowhere to be found.
You left your house on about 3, and we know you got to Glassbury based on your own words on or about 4. Why would it take an hour to travel? And I'm guessing 20-something miles at the rate of 65 miles an hour is just mathematically not possible.
On or around 3.
Okay.
About 3.
So
perhaps after.
But this security footage taken outside Nathan's apartment complex shows him leaving at 2:57 a.m. Linda tries calling her son 3 times, but his phone appears to be turned off. He finally calls her back at 4:01 a.m.
Did you think you were closing in on an arrest?
I thought so. Yes.
I have to ask you straight up, were you involved in your grandfather's death? Did you kill him?
Absolutely not. No.
But that potential smoking gun, the Sig Sauer rifle, is still missing. Despite a months-long extensive search of Nathan's apartment, the Chocolate estate, and surrounding areas for that crucial piece of evidence, it's nowhere to be found.
And I think that's exactly what they were pinning their entire case on, was that murder weapon. Had they found it and connected it to Nathan, then Nathan would have been in handcuffs.
And so law enforcement was directed to keep working to try to build the case.
This had to be frustrating.
It just tears at you because, you know, you think you've got it. The family had put up a huge billboard on Interstate 91, you know, and coming and going to work every day, I would see that. I would see Mr. Chocolos's face. I would see, you know, reward money for information.
Even though Nathan is under a cloud of suspicion, he's still a free man, but feels like he's an outcast in his own community now. So he takes a portion of his inheritance that had been given to him by his grandfather, and he leaves the state. He travels to Vermont, and he buys an historic farmhouse, and he also bought a boat.
Nathan buys a 31-foot fishing boat, formerly called the Chicken Pox. He plans another fishing outing with his mom, Linda, who has stood by him throughout all the accusations.
And Linda is very excited about that opportunity, but also very concerned because she knows that her son is not an experienced fisherman or an experienced boater.
Linda tells friends that the plan was to fish off the coast of Block Island and head back the next morning.
She was so concerned that she had a text message conversation with people ashore, and that's a smart thing to do, to let people know what your plans are.
So she went out of the way to give them information in case something happened.
Yes, indeed.
When Linda fails to check in, her friends start to worry.
2 of her best friends reach out to authorities and say, something has happened, we need your help.
At first, we were like, okay, hopefully it's just they're overdue and they're going to come back to shore.
But after several days elapse, authorities search Nathan's home and vehicle and find some alarming items.
We start thinking that he may have intent to either harm himself and his mother or both of them.
How did you get word that something had gone wrong with that?
My cousin Charlene called me and told me that they were missing. And I said, I told her not to go on that boat.
Here is Nathan in a 31-foot aluminum boat with his mother, who's got no experience boating, and he thinks that he's the master fisherman or the master boater. Or does he think this is the perfect place to kill his mother? Because in the middle of the ocean, nobody can hear you scream.
But what really happened on that boat? Nathan Carmen answers tough questions under oath.
How often did you lie to the Windsor Police Department?
There was one inaccurate.
Staring out at that open water, probably wondering what happened to my mother, or thinking, did I just get away with murder?
His mother is still missing and feared dead.
And the question becomes, what happened? Everybody wants to know what happened.
I didn't know if she had been dragged down with the ship. Neither of us had been wearing life vests.
The media coverage was huge.
I'm just asking you to defend yourself against these people who are saying that you did something to your boat that would make it sink.
Yeah, we're done for this evening, period.
He was shooting himself in the foot on national TV.
It is absolutely unfair for the police to use the tragedy that happened to my mother and I as an opportunity to try to nail me for a murder that I didn't commit.
Nathan's grandfather, John Chocolass, had been shot to death 3 years prior to the disappearance of Linda Carmen. And once those connections were made, the story amplified.
You were convinced that Nathan had killed his grandfather.
Correct.
And now you're convinced that he killed his own mother?
It's a story about greed and heartless brutality.
Mr. Chocolass was found in a bedroom on the upper part of the house, in his bed, shot several times in the head. We have to treat everyone as a possible suspect. Anyone could have done this.
But my sisters had told me they suspected Nathan. And that just totally blew me out of the water.
The daughters of John Chocolass got very angry that there was really nothing happening with the case. They couldn't find the murder weapon. They hadn't arrested Nathan Carmen.
And it's just getting wilder and wilder.
Could a family be this burdened to have a second catastrophic event? I didn't know. This is slowly starting to move from a missing persons case to something other than a missing persons case.
It's been 3 years since John Chocolass's murder, with no charges ever filed. Now, the family is facing yet another tragedy as Chocolass's grandson, Nathan Carmen's boat sinks on a fishing trip, with Nathan's mom, Linda, missing and presumed drowned. We're going to head out on a ride on the open water to get a better idea of what happened out here. I met up with Dave Farrell, a maritime lawyer for Nathan's boat insurers. So let's pick up with when the Coast Guard gets involved in this.
They had a lot of vessels out here. They had a lot of aerial searches. And they were really crisscrossing an area that eventually was 64,000 square miles.
That's a big coverage area.
Yeah, the state of Georgia.
And then 2 days later, there's a big shock.
The Orient Lucky finds a life raft 106 miles south of Martha's Vineyard, and in it is Nathan Carmen alone.
With his crew already snapping pictures and recording video, the ship's captain is alerted to a life raft in the water.
After spotting Nathan Carmen and his life raft at sea, I sounded the alarm for our crew to prepare for the rescue efforts, and we were ready to rescue him.
They threw him a life ring, and he grabbed it with his hands. He got dragged up toward the hull of the ship. He was able to push off the side of the ship with his outstretched hand, and he was able to climb up the gangway.
He got onto the ladder. We pulled the ladder up on board.
When Nathan gets aboard the Orient Lucky, the kid looked like Aquaman. There was no physical distress in his well-being. He wasn't dehydrated. He was not hypothermic.
The captain of the Orient Lucky doesn't see anything wrong with him. This is astounding.
I got the call from my supervisor that he'd been located and recovered. I was shocked, and I was thankful. I was happy that there was a survivor, but it was also concerning because Linda hadn't been recovered.
When I found out that, Linda was lost at sea and, I knew she wasn't coming back, it was just, I just had flashbacks of us growing up and just, the good times that we did have. And then, of course, the guilt and the regret that I had of how I treated her in the end. You just don't think that you're going to lose somebody so suddenly like that.
We receive a call from the Coast Guard that Nathan was picked up by a merchant vessel in the shipping lanes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. First thing you say is, okay, where's Linda? Linda's not with him, just Nathan.
Back on land, with his lawyer present, Nathan's interviewed by Alfred Bucco, an investigator with the South Kingston, Rhode Island Police Department. This audio's never been broadcast before.
I just went in there and said, Nathan, tell me what happened.
We went out to Block Canyon. It was light, but the sun wasn't over the horizon yet. And we started trolling.
Okay.
And I heard strange noise coming from the engine compartment. So I opened up the hatch in front of the pilot house, and I saw that there was a lot of water in the bilge.
He went and shut down the engine and moved aft to where his mother was.
He said he told his mom to reel in the lines. How did he describe what was happening with the commotion?
He said to his mother only one thing during this calamity, and it was reel in the lines. And she said only one thing in return, okay, I will. At that point, he went up into the wheelhouse, and he says that he started moving emergency gear up to the bow. He wasn't quite ready to abandon ship, but he wanted to be ready.
I didn't realize we were sinking.
Okay.
I knew there was water in the bilge. I knew there was a lot of water because it was already up to that level, which is why I wanted to bring the safety stuff as a precaution.
Okay.
But I thought I was going to find the problem and fix it.
The third time that he's been in the wheelhouse and failed to radio, he's walking forward to the bow, and all of a sudden, in a split second, the boat sinks.
Boats don't sink that fast.
No. And it sank quickly, like immediately it was out of sight. And that's how he says he never saw his mother again.
He calls for his mother throughout the rest of the day. And he said upon nightfall, he gave up trying to search for her, and he went to sleep and then drifted through the Atlantic Ocean until he was located. So let's get back to your mother. You talk to her, all the time. You go out fishing twice a week. How would you describe, your relationship with her? Is it good?
I don't see the relevance to this particular incident here.
Yeah, I concur.
I think this interview's over. Thank you, though.
After the interview was over, from our perspective, we're like, okay, this isn't just a missing persons investigation. We may be dealing with maybe a homicide.
Captain Hengdong observed Nathan walking the deck of the Orient Lucky for hours at a time by himself, staring out at that open water, probably wondering what happened to my mother, or thinking, did I just get away with murder?
And soon, the whole world will hear from Nathan Carman in his own words.
She'd always been kind of reluctant about safety. I guess she had good reason to be.
New developments in that mystery at sea. Rescued after 8 days in a life raft, searchers had given up.
Nathan Carman and his mother went fishing last week. He survived the ordeal, but his mother didn't make it.
Now authorities are trying to figure out what happened.
The media coverage was huge. This was a story that made headlines around the country.
Initially, Nathan avoids the media, but eventually agrees to an interview with then ABC News correspondent Lindsay Janis in 2017. At his suggestion, they meet at a park near his home.
So take me through that evening. You met at the marina in Rhode Island, and then what?
We met at the marina in Rhode Island, and we had bait, which we got on board. And as we were heading out into the harbor, I had asked her a couple times in the past, will you go to the canyons with me? And she'd always been kind of reluctant about safety, and I guess she had good reason to be.
While Nathan and Linda were still missing and the Coast Guard scouring the Atlantic, investigators back on land began searching through their vehicles here at this marina, looking for clues that might help in the search.
It looked like he had been somewhat almost living out of his truck or sleeping in his truck. We found some receipts from different marine stores.
Items purchased at area marinas in the hours before the fateful voyage included a rock-type anchor that would never have worked for Nathan's boat. and then some lengths of chain. They were curious purchases.
But there was also a bucket of eels that was in Nathan's truck. That stood out to me because eels are often used as bait when fishing for striped bass. And if you left the dock and didn't take your bait, what are you using for bait if you're going fishing?
Nathan tells us the same story he told police, that his mom had been concerned about safety ahead of the boat trip.
And I want to stress that it wasn't an argument, because I want to stress that it was not an argument. She had always been kind of skittish. We're stopping right here with that question.
Oh, okay.
But why not reach out for help? The Coast Guard said there was no Mayday call.
I had a radio, and there was also an EPIRB, which is an emergency position indicating radio beacon, on the boat, like someone needs to be medevaced, or when you know you're sinking. But I didn't know that we were sinking until we sank.
Nathan said that there was a lot of commotion going on and the water was being taken on in here. So where would his mom have been when all of this is happening?
Right where you are.
So she would have been right back in this area?
Yes.
But they're not speaking? I mean, and she doesn't know that they're going down?
Nathan has excellent line of sight on her the whole time, and yet he says he never saw her afterwards.
At that point, I didn't know if she had been dragged down with the ship, because neither of us had been wearing life vests. I assumed that if she had been on the surface, that she would have been calling out to me and I would have been able to find her.
According to Nathan, days go by and he huddles on the life raft, keeping a lookout for rescuers.
I was looking out at the horizon for other ships or for helicopters when conditions were good. When the waves were high, because they got to like 13 feet and they were breaking waves at a few points, a few days.
It must have been terrifying.
Yes.
But to some, Nathan's claim of drifting for over a week in rough seas before being rescued defies belief.
The initial videos showing this guy walking up the gangway of the ship without any great problem. He seemed to be just fine.
You would be in dire straits after, 5 or 6 days.
If you laid on that couch for 8 days and you got up to go to the bathroom, your legs would be wobbly because you haven't used them.
At the same time that Nathan and Linda's vehicles were searched at the docks, police in Vermont were conducting a search of Nathan's house, which was under construction.
The investigators find, modems, SIM cards, a few other things. The one thing they don't find is a computer. Whatever computer he was using to conduct his online purchases has disappeared.
Another item that was seized during the search was a lengthy letter that Nathan had written to an unknown priest that described his relationship and his view of his mother.
My mother's bullying, calling me a quitter, a stuck-up snob who thinks he is a king, and a piece of basically characterized my childhood. One night, though, I went to bed imagining myself as essentially a master of my own hell, joying in inflicting grave bodily suffering on other people. So, yeah.
After his interview with Alfred Bucco, Nathan has all but stopped talking to the police and is never questioned about the letter or his missing computer. Reporter Lindsay Janis is one of the few people he is willing to talk to.
I know I wasn't responsible for anything that resulted from the boat sinking. I know I wasn't responsible for my mom's death.
You were convinced that Nathan had killed his grandfather.
Correct.
And now you're convinced that he killed his own mother?
Yes.
That's pretty dark stuff. If the interview hadn't already made Nathan's story seem a little fishy, the follow-up was even more eye-opening.
I did not cause my mother's death. We're done here this evening.
If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem answering the questions.
Oh, Dave.
Oh, hi, Dave. Nice to meet you. Hi, how are you?
I'm Matt. Nice
hi,
to meet you.
Matt, nice to meet you, Matt. Thanks so much for taking us out. Initially, when everybody else was scratching their heads and wondering, wow, this poor guy, what happened to his mom? For the average person out there who's looking at this and taking it at face value, folks who know the water, like you do, had your doubts.
Absolutely. People had doubts about this story from the beginning.
With Linda Carmen presumed lost at sea, her reportedly tumultuous relationship with her son Nathan was under renewed scrutiny. He sits down with 2020 for a second interview, which now holds new significance.
If someone said that you did not get along with your mother, that you did not like her, is there any truth to that at all?
No, there's not any truth to that. Our relationship had grown from where it had been. We did have a challenging relationship at one point in my life, but she was the closest person in the world to me after my grandfather passed.
Will you inherit all of what your mother had?
That's something that I can't comment on at this time.
But unbeknownst to Nathan, his mom has decided not to leave him any inheritance. She even records a video message obtained exclusively by 2020, explaining that he won't be getting her house.
Hey, big guy, I guess if you're watching this, you're watching this. I want to explain why I did what I did, and why my will is stated the way it is. I feel that when you moved out, you took everything that was of value to you and everything you wanted. That's my feeling.
And in her written last will and testament, dated 3 years before she disappeared, Linda explicitly excludes Nathan as a beneficiary.
By now, more details of John Chocolos's death and the subsequent investigation have risen to the surface.
Initially, the media was unaware that Nathan's grandfather, John Chocolos, had been shot to death in his bed 3 years prior to the disappearance of Linda Carmen. And once those connections were made, the story amplified. It wasn't a bittersweet rescue story anymore. It was something potentially much more devious.
So, at what point in your life would you say that you became really close with your grandfather?
Here's where I have a bit of an issue. My understanding was we were going to be sitting down and we were going to be talking about
yeah, the raft is my next bit, but we did explain that we need to hear about your whole life leading up to this incident. How can people know who Nathan is if we don't tell them? What was your relationship like with your grandfather?
I'm not talking about my relationship with my grandfather or with if you want to ask me any more questions on that line, we're done here.
Can you tell me more about what your grandfather did? He was a big figure in this part of the country.
That's not what this interview is about.
He gets really defensive if people pry a little bit too much. And the way that he shut her off on so many questions and wouldn't cooperate, he was shooting himself in the foot on national TV.
Since we spoke a week ago, there's been a lot of speculation. People are suspicious of you. What do you want to say to those people who are saying something about his story that just isn't adding up?
I'm not aware that those people exist.
There are suspicions about the boat trip. Since we last got together a week ago,
I've said the way it happened.
I'm just asking you to defend yourself against these people who are saying that you did something to your boat that would make it sink.
That's not true.
Nathan had never been interviewed at length by a network or by a reporter, so this was something new to Nathan, and I think Nathan thought it was going to go one way when it certainly went another way.
Was there an issue with the boat that needed to be fixed?
No, there were. We're done.
Nathan, I'm trying to give you an opportunity to speak out against these allegations that have been made.
The only way that I can speak out against them is to say what actually happened, and that's what I've been trying to do.
Another thing that's happened since we last got together, police searched your mom's home.
Yeah,
Did you know anything about that?
We're done for this evening, period. We're done here.
We're not trying to make you uncomfortable. We're trying to give you an opportunity to answer some of these allegations.
We're done here this evening.
If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem answering the questions.
He walked out. He walked out of the interview, only to come back.
Police never arrested you for the murder of your grandfather. Do you think it is unfair that people are bringing that up and talking about that now?
It is absolutely unfair for the police to use the tragedy that happened to my mother and I as an opportunity to try to nail me for a murder that I didn't commit.
Can you understand when people see that you were the last person to see two people alive? They see that and they say you are either the most unlucky man alive or you had something to do with those two deaths. What do you say to that?
I say that there's no relationship.
Later that month, Nathan holds a memorial service for his mom. It's sparsely attended by some of her friends. Linda's sisters are notably absent.
Now, Linda hasn't even been declared dead yet. Nobody in his family is willing to go because many of us in his family believe that Nathan is truly the culprit.
I'm very grateful to the friends and family who attended in memory of my mom.
Nathan, you've been through so much. How have you been these last several weeks?
It's been very difficult.
We had no boat. We had no body. But as in any investigation, there's always evidence that can be recovered. It's just a matter of making sure that you know where to look.
There's all hands on deck at that point to try to uncover the truth.
As with the death of John Chocolos, according to investigators, there isn't enough evidence to charge Nathan with a crime. But in a twist of fate, a seemingly innocuous insurance claim for the sunken boat is about to take the saga of Nathan Carman in an unexpected direction.
Some of these strange occurrences maybe could be chalked up to an inexperienced fisherman, a guy who's panicking.
You know, I spent a lot of time with Nathan. I think he was cold, calculating, and had this whole story planned out to explain the disappearance of his mother and the sinking of the vessel.
The idea that he drifted for a week in that life raft just didn't hold water for you?
Not even for a second.
The Nathan Carman case was incredibly explosive. A young man is plucked out of the ocean. That just conjures up all of these images of, say, Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Author Casey Sherman has spent the last 2.5 years researching the case for his new book, Blood in the Water.
The story is so complex and it has so many layers to it. Not only do you have one potential murder, but it's the story about a family and how wealth can corrupt.
As investigators continue digging into Nathan Carman's story of being lost at sea, he takes action, filing an insurance claim for $85,000 to recoup the loss of his boat, the chickenpox.
It happened very promptly, and that indicated to me that this guy's really serious.
The insurance company is not going to pay Nathan. In fact, they are going to take Nathan to court. Nathan also didn't back down.
We filed our suit to deny insurance coverage. We were in for a fight. We came away with the distinct impression that almost everything he said to us was a lie. There were holes in every aspect of his story.
Holes in his story and his boat. Here at this marina where Nathan's odyssey began, fellow boaters noticed odd behavior in him the day before that fateful trip.
It kind of caught my eye when I saw him leaning over the back and drilling 2 holes in the transom of the boat. I asked him, "What are you doing?" That's why he told me, he says, He's taking the trim tabs off.
Trim tabs are stabilization devices that help lift the boat up higher on the water. Nathan admits to removing them, leaving holes in his boat, but says he patched them up with a marine putty.
I patched the holes. They seemed to be well patched. And at the time my mom and I went out, I felt that one, I knew those holes were above the water line, and two, I felt that they were securely patched.
The idea that he was patching up those holes, that putty, the patching didn't work?
It wouldn't work. My theory is that he was trying to make it look like he was deliberately altering the boat in a dangerous fashion.
So that maybe it looked like he made a mistake.
He's very calculating. He wanted people to be able to point to, oh, no wonder the boat sank.
Attorney Dave Farrow represented Nathan's boat insurance companies and has looked into Nathan's account of what happened for years. Nathan's story is that his boat started taking on water, but he failed to put out a distress call because he didn't think the boat was sinking. One would think then maybe he would call out for help, the Mayday situation, right? Did he do that?
No, and he had ample opportunity, because each of the times that he went into the wheelhouse to carry gear forward, he was within arm's length of the microphone for his VHF radio, and a good one.
This is where the emergency equipment is, right? Here?
Yeah, right here. A microphone within arm's reach. And he came in here 3 times to get survival gear and bring it up to the bow. So he was within an arm's length 3 times he could have picked it up.
All of these things sound pretty odd. Maybe you can chalk them up to panic, an inexperienced fisherman, but you would have to have hard evidence to really show that he wasn't where he should have been.
I got an oceanographer to assess whether it was possible for him to drift in a life raft to where the Orient Lucky picked him up 7 days later.
And was it?
Absolutely impossible. Physically impossible.
I looked at drifting buoys, I looked at historical data, I looked at thermal images of the Gulf Stream rings. All these different systems showed the currents going westward, and Nathan claimed he drifted eastward. And that did not make any sense.
And Nathan's aunts aren't buying his alleged fish tales either.
New twist to the story making national headlines involving Nathan Carmen.
They file what is known as a slayer petition, which prevents a person from inheriting property from someone they murdered.
Nathan Carmen's aunts do not want him to inherit that money, and they say essentially profit off of 2 deaths they believe he caused.
When Nathan walks into court, he's actually got a suit and he's cleaned up, he's shaven.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Nathan Carmen appearing on my own behalf.
He looks like a young, aspiring law student.
The loss of my mom has been extremely difficult for me, so I can sympathize with petitioners in that respect.
He ended up taking depositions. He ended up going into court and arguing motions.
I'll say that some of the petitioners had awfully substantial motive. And I had very, very little.
He ended up putting up his own defense.
You saw him sort of tell the truth the whole time.
But in this deposition obtained by 2020, it's Nathan in the hot seat.
This is the deposition of Nathan Carmen.
Did you have a close relationship with your mother, Linda Carmen?
I would say that I did, yes.
When asked to respond to claims that he lied to police during their interviews with him in 2013, Nathan clams up.
How often did you lie to the Windsor Police Department?
There was one inaccurate. I'm pleading the 5th.
Pleading the 5th as to lying to the Windsor Police Department after your grandfather is dead.
That's what
correct?
he said.
Okay.
Nathan pleads the 5th 81 times during this deposition.
I plead the 5th. I plead the 5th. I plead the 5th. And I plead the 5th.
Meaning he declines to answer questions to avoid potentially incriminating himself.
I plead the 5th.
That's damaging to Nathan, I think, in the public's mind. Who takes the 5th? You know, mobsters take the 5th. Gang lords take the 5th. Not somebody that's completely innocent.
Nathan Carmen caught a legal break today after a judge told
tossed out the lawsuit his aunts had filed to keep him from collecting millions of dollars from his grandfather's estate.
The judge dismisses the case after he rules John Chocolos wasn't a resident of New Hampshire.
The newspapers reported it as a tremendous win for Nathan. I wasn't too troubled by it.
Nathan is off the hook for his family lawsuit, but his insurance case is looming, and investigators have him in their sight.
Pieces of the puzzle had started to come together.
There were too many inconsistencies.
There's no such thing as a perfect crime.
Nathan Carmen and his insurer head to court in Providence, Rhode Island, battling it out in what would be Nathan's biggest legal challenge yet.
Was Nathan at fault for the sinking of his boat, or was he owed a payday?
Nathan Carmen and his lawyer saying absolutely nothing, heading into Providence federal court this morning for the first day of the civil trial against Carmen.
He's got everything to lose here. If the court determines that he is negligent in his mother's death, that can open up the potential for criminal charges. Nathan at times was very agitated during the trial, but he was also very active, always leaning over and having conversations with his attorney. And he was right in the thick of things.
He takes the stand, sticking to his story of what happened on that boat. What was he like on the stand?
He is very articulate when he wants to be, very exacting, but also very evasive.
Nathan had no emotion when he testified. That may be because he is on the autism spectrum. And he talked about his mother in a way that she was more of a nuisance than she was a help to him while that boat was going down.
The judge asked him, "What's going on with your mother during all this time?" And Nathan's peculiar answer was, "My mother was part of the problem rather than the solution to a sinking boat."
With the case now in the judge's hands, Nathan talks to the media outside the courthouse.
This isn't about money. It's an $85,000 claim. I almost feel like I have a responsibility to my mom to make sure that the truth comes out.
At the end of the trial, the judge rules that Nathan was negligent with regard to the sinking of the chickenpox.
That was a small victory for me because at least a little bit of justice was prevailing through it all.
The civil case acted as the de facto criminal case. FBI investigators, Coast Guard investigators, attorneys, prosecutors, they all had front row seats.
Now it transitioned to his house in Vermont.
Pieces of the puzzle had started to come together and had started to paint a picture for us that this was in fact a criminal act.
There were too many inconsistencies. There were too many things that just didn't add up.
It became very, very clear that Nathan had committed a crime on the high seas.
We don't have a body, we don't have a boat, so it's a very, very difficult case to try to prove. The grand jurors have to decide, is there enough evidence to proceed and indict?
It took several years, but Nathan Carmen is now charged with killing his mother.
Nathan agrees to meet with investigators, but has no clue what's about to happen.
Nathan was surprised when he was advised that he was under arrest for the murder of Linda Carmen.
It was like something out of the golden age of piracy. Nathan was charged with murder on the high seas.
According to an indictment, Carmen devised a scheme to defraud his grandfather's estate and to obtain money from the trust, and the murders were part of this scheme.
However, the indictment doesn't charge Nathan with the murder of John Chocolos.
Medical records, school records.
Nathan hires defense attorney Marty Manella.
Marty Manella is a long-time, very bulldogged litigator, and when he met Nathan, he not only found a client, but he found a son.
He had literally no support. That was probably the hardest thing that Nathan had to endure, the fact that he had no one. But he had us. He really had us. And I had never in 50 years of practicing law had that kind of relationship with a client. Never.
As he's escorted into federal court for arraignment, cameras catch Nathan defiantly proclaiming his innocence.
Not guilty.
Before pleading not guilty to the court as well.
During Nathan's detention hearing, his aunts read a letter to the judge saying that if you let him go, they would be in fear for their life.
I was very relieved that Nathan was going to be put behind bars. If Nathan was not arrested and not contained, I really think he would have gone on a murder spree.
For years, Nathan had lived in solitude in Vermont. He had never threatened anyone. So to me, it was unusual that they were in fear of what?
The court sides with his aunts and denies Nathan's bail, setting a trial date for October 2nd, 2023. Marty and his team get to work.
It was a huge undertaking, and it was a daily, 7-day-a-week thing. It really became part of our lives.
Nathan was incredibly active in his defense. Every waking hour when he wasn't in his jail cell, he was at the prison library, poring over legal books.
This case was his whole life. He wanted his day in court. He wanted to clear his name.
The day of June 15th, 2023, came as a shock. They were just a few months away from trial.
We've learned Nathan Carmen has died while awaiting a trial for his mother's death.
I got a call in the morning. Nathan was gone, and he hung himself. And I just cried.
Nathan took his own life. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't despondent. We were all looking forward to that October date so that we could have this trial.
Despite all the family court battles and accusations, Nathan's aunts come to pay their respects at his funeral.
I attended Nathan's funeral. Myself and my sisters were there. I was very sad.
Nathan's attorney paid for the funeral, paid for his cremation, and then gave his eulogy.
Non-violent and loving young man. Sleep with the angels, my dear friend. It was probably the toughest thing I ever did because it was like losing a family member. It may sound crazy. You lose cases, you lose clients, but you don't have that kind of contact that we had with this person.
I think he is both a victim and a villain in his own story. Nathan Carmen remains an enigma.
The criminal charges against Nathan were dismissed. So in the eyes of the law, Nathan is an innocent man still today.
Months after Nathan Carmen's funeral, a Connecticut judge officially declares his mom, Linda, deceased 7 years after she disappeared at sea. The Windsor Police Department tells 2020 that John Chocolos's murder case is still active.
What I'd like people to remember about my dad, he was kind, he was loving. He'd give you a hard time, but he always did it out of love. Linda was so kind and generous to her friends and the people around her. And I remember all the good times that Linda and I had.
What do you want people to know and remember about your uncle, John?
He's a guy that did it himself. I mean, I loved that guy, you know, and he loved me.
How much do you miss him all these years later?
Every day. Yep. We went to the cemetery today. Nathan's got a stone there, next to my uncle. Why is he buried there? There's no stone there for my cousin Linda. Where's her stone?
Nathan should be remembered as a troubled soul. I'm happy, I'm relieved that Nathan was buried in the family plot next to my dad. Nathan, the child, belongs where he is. He needs to rest.
That's our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm Deborah Roberts.
And I'm David Muir from all of us here at 2020 and ABC News. Good night.
A young mother vanishes without a trace in a rural part of Lancashire in the northwest of England.
Where is she? Where has she been left? What has happened to Katie?
Quickly, a prime suspect emerges, but he is determined to lead the investigation astray.
Everything that he says has happened has been proved to not be true, proved to be impossible.
They didn't see this as a straightforward missing person case. They had helicopters up, they had dogs, they had officers, everybody was searching the forest for this shallow grave. The Forest of Bowland is such a picturesque place, it's a real beauty spot. It's the last place that you would expect something so dark and chilling to take place.
The Forest of Bowland, also known as Bowland Fells, is a picturesque area of gritstone fells and valleys in the northeast of Lancashire.
Bowland in Lancashire is a beautiful rural part of the UK. There's over 800 kilometres of an area of outstanding natural beauty in the forest surrounding it. It's one of the most, idyllic places that people would associate with the greener parts of England.
It's really popular for people that are taking the dogs out for walks. There's lots of people that go hiking, a bit of mountain biking goes on up there.
I mean, in an area like that, you wouldn't expect to see a great deal of crime, particularly things like violent crime, because obviously it's an area that is very, very sparsely populated. The most emergency services involvement you'd often see would be things like, mountain rescues of walkers, as opposed to actual crime and, the police being called in to investigate serious incidents particularly.
But on April 22nd, 2022, unspeakable horrors take place in the forest. A local woman has disappeared.
It didn't feel right at all. She was a mum who would have been home for her children, so it was one of those that, from the off, really felt a bit worrying.
The missing woman is identified as 33-year-old Katie Kenyon from Burnley, Lancashire.
Katie Kenyon was a mother of two. She was in her early 30s, and she was somebody that was known for, not just love of her own kids, but of all kids. She loved to be surrounded by children and young people, even to the extent that she tried to set up summer camps for children in her local area. She loved to spend time with her dog, and she was really happy in the outdoors. She was also close to her family. She was, described as a beautiful soul by her family, and somebody that was really outgoing, vivacious and lively, somebody that liked to be around other people and had so much going on for her.
She has had her ups and downs. She's split from her previous partner, but she's got her life back on track. She's got her children. She's got her beloved dog, Indy. She's got 2 sisters. She's the middle sister. She's got her mum. She normally texts her mum 2 or 3 times a day. So she's a real family person, and she's extremely loved, likeable. Her family even say that, she's a little bit silly in the sense of, she's got a great sense of humour. So she's someone that she's special. She's really special.
Katie's family are the first to sense something is wrong when they receive texts from her phone that seem unusual.
Well, the chain of events that makes Katie Canyon's family suspicious is that she disappears, they don't hear from her, or they hear from somebody using her phone but they don't believe to be her. They say that the messages that are coming through, there are things like misspellings or grammatical or punctuation errors that she wouldn't ordinarily make.
They were not in the way that Katie would phrase anything. The grammar was poor, the phraseology was poor. They became concerned that these text messages perhaps weren't actually from Katie at all.
There was one word in particular that was repeatedly spelt wrong, and that word was while. Every time that word was used, and it was used several times, it was spelt without the H. The other glaring problem was that the messages spoke about the dog, Indy, and the dog's name was spelt wrong. Katie wouldn't have spelt her own dog's name wrong.
Katie's on-off boyfriend, 51-year-old Andrew Burfield, also received strange text messages from her that day.
Just give us a ring whenever you can, lads. You don't have to be like this, we can sort it out. Whatever help you need, whatever you need from me, or anybody else. I just need to know you're safe and where you're going, that's all.
Katie had been in an on and off relationship with Andrew Burfield. He was a builder, kind of doing odd jobs and so on. They didn't live together, but they were on and off in a relationship.
Her relationship with Burfield was very strange. He seemed to really manipulate her.
Burfield would use her mental health against her. He really weaponised her mental health. She was suffering from anxiety. She had made that clear. He would always mention it. He'd be mentioning it in text messages. He'd mention it to her all the time. He'd mention it to her family. Really, we know that with coercive control, anxiety is only going to get worse. And so she's with someone, she's already anxious, and he's gaslighting her. And the more and more he mentions it, the more and more she's going to be getting anxious. And the more and more she might start believing that actually he's here to help me, but I do have all these problems, and maybe I'm not good enough, and maybe I'm not worthy, and maybe I'm not a good enough mum, and maybe I'm not a good enough sister. So he's chipping away and eroding her confidence.
It's reported that Burfield had lent Katie some money. Debt collectors were involved, even though this was a personal arrangement. What was happening, though, was that Burfield was getting debt collectors involved, who would understandably chase Katie for this money, but he would tell Katie not to worry, that it's going to be okay, that he will sort things out. So this really unusual split type of behaviour was going on behind the scenes.
Financially abusing a victim can also ensure that they're further isolating them.
Hey, lads, I'm at work. Listen, I've just got your message. You can please ring me. I'm a bit worried. Just ring me. I don't have to do this. I'm not worried about the money. I don't worry about the money. Just ring me, please. Thank you.
He's saying, well, don't worry about the money, Babs. I'll sort it and I'll pay it. Now, it's an accumulating debt. So it's gone from sort of 2,000 to 4,000 to 6,000. And this, for someone who is highly anxious, is going to be absolutely terrifying them. She's worried she's going to lose her home. She's worried she's going to lose everything. And then behind the scenes, he's phoning up the debt collectors saying, can you put more pressure on her? And then he goes back to her again. Oh, it's okay, don't worry about the money. It's fine, it's all going to be okay, I'm going to help you. He's this knight in shining armour. So there's this absolute duplicitous occurrence of what's going on with this money, and it's definitely there to control her.
It soon becomes evident that Katie had been fearful of Burfield in the months leading up to her disappearance.
Things were so bad that Katie at one point had said to her sister, if I disappear, if something happens to me, it will be him. That gives you an indication of just how bad things were in that relationship, but the extent too of the control that Andrew Burfield had over her, that she wasn't able to break free of that.
It seemed to be the case that they'd separated on some level, but Burfield just kept reeling her back in. He just kept telling her, I'm going to get you the help. He had this money that he was holding over her. He had her in the palm of his hand, really, in one way.
Katie's family grow increasingly worried for her well-being and decide to go to Burfield's house to see if he's had contact with her.
Katie's sister and her boyfriend turn up at Burfield's house, and oddly, he's not allowing them entry.
Her car is outside Andrew Burfield's home, and her family see this vehicle there, realise that they can't get hold of her. So that's the point at which the alarm is raised with the police.
Evidence is beginning to suggest that Burfield may know more than he's letting on about Katie's disappearance. Her sister calls the police, who pay Burfield a visit. What will he reveal? "33-year-old Katie Kenyon, a mother of two from Burnley, Lancashire, has disappeared, raising concerns among her family after they received suspicious text messages from her phone. Her sister pays a visit to Andrew Burfield, Katie's on-off boyfriend who has been financially manipulating her, and notices her car is parked outside his house. She calls the police, who arrive promptly to investigate.
And then you see this incredible footage of the body-worn video that the officers are wearing when they confront Andrew Burfield about the whereabouts of Katie Kenyon.
These guys outside are concerned about Katie. Do you know where she is?
Yeah, no, I don't. What's happening? I got a text at 2:30
today.
Yeah, saying I came to your house this morning. I'll show you the text.
From Katie?
Yeah. Right. But when I picked the kids up from school and came on, the keys and that were behind the door. So we came into the keys behind the door, so she's in.
You know, he's immediately sparks up a cigarette, seems quite nervous, but what he doesn't seem is emotional or concerned or worried at that time either about where she might be. It doesn't share the same emotions as the family, even though he's with her. And that's quite a poignant thing to look at somebody's body language at that point.
She told me she went on a walk.
She what, sorry?
She told me, she said she dropped the car off this morning and the stuff. Before that message came through, so, what you up to, that's me, what you up to, guys. And that were at 1:30. She put, just out on a walk. You?
Burfield didn't seem worried in the slightest. He was just saying, no, I'm not, you know, this has only just happened. But then, from the messages that he showed the police, it seemed that he'd been concerned about her from 2 o'clock that afternoon. So several hours he'd been texting her saying, come home. Didn't add up.
Sorry to interrupt. So, are you concerned, Katie?
Yeah.
So, how come, have you reported any of this?
No, because it's only just happened. I've had a sister right.
You said the message come at 2:30.
Yeah, so the message come through at 2:45.
Yeah.
And you've replied pretty much straight away. I know, I'm just wondering, because you said it's only just happened, but it's happened at like 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, but I picked the kids up. I came here at 4. To be honest with you, I thought it was just like, I don't know, just like.
So you weren't concerned?
I were, but I were, if you will.
Okay.
Having viewed the body cam footage, it's really clear to me that the police that attended the house knew that something wasn't right. They were questioning Burfield. They were trying to get to the bottom of what happened. They didn't see this as a straightforward missing person case.
It's like mind games, isn't it?
But he's had these messages from just before 2 today, but he's not reported them. He sent messages back saying like, what the hell was going on here? But he's not reported them missing at that point. Yves's is concerned.
The day progresses without anyone having seen or heard from Katie, and Burfield denies any knowledge of her whereabouts. Police now ramp up their investigation.
They know that there have been these messages from Katie's phone, so they're then able to investigate those, and they can kind of use cell site analysis to ping where that phone has been, basically. And what they can see from that is that as well as being at Andrew Burfield's property, the phone has left that area and has been in the area of Gisborne Forest for around 51 minutes earlier that day. So that's something that enables them a very quick way of locating at least where that device has been, if not necessarily where Katie has been. But they're then able to use that triangulated phone data against camera showings from CCTV that prove that Burfield's transit van left that area with Katie in the vehicle. When it returned around an hour later, she's not in the vehicle, but the phone still is.
What they couldn't see was Andrew Burfield's phone moving at all from his home address, as though it's been left there. However, what they could see, Katie's phone, once that phone has then cell-sighted back to Andrew Burfield's home, it goes off.
Which is ringing all sorts of alarm bells. Where is she? Where did he drop her off? Where has she been left? What has happened to Katie?
The SIO then makes a decision to say, right, this person is no longer essentially a person of interest. He is now a suspect. And decisions were made to go back to him, back to Andrew Burfield's house the following day on the 23rd of April.
What they found when they got to the house, though, was that even though it was a really hot day, the log burner was on. It was really hot, and this was unusual.
It was so hot, it was like a furnace inside the house. And that, an indication there that perhaps things are being burnt on that fire. You know, completely unnecessary to have it, so why has he got that fire burning? A decision was made at that point when they could link that van to Andrew Burfield and say, she was in that van when she left. When your van came back, she was no longer there. So without a body, without any evidence at that stage in his inquiry, the SIO makes a decision that he should be arrested for kidnap.
Where is the last location that you know that she was?
At my house.
Right, so you know she was at your house? Yeah. Okay, and when was that?
What was it? 9:20 yesterday morning.
Okay. So since then you don't know her whereabouts?
I don't know where she's gone from there, no.
Right.
As questioning continues, Burfield begins to reveal more information.
He told the police at one point that he'd lent Katie £6,000 to go and check into a rehab centre or a clinic.
I think she's at a rehab centre.
A rehab centre?
Or some sort of clinic.
Right, okay. And where would that be?
I haven't got a clue.
Right, okay. And why do you think that she's at that location?
Because that's not that location, one of them locations, I think.
He has no idea where this rehab clinic or centre is, what its name is, how she would have got there, given that her vehicle is still outside. So he's still then saying, oh, she's gone there, I don't know anything.
I'm going to appeal to you now to let me know if you do know anything at all.
I'll tell you, I'll go and get her myself.
Yeah? Okay, because I'm sure you're aware that her family are really, really concerned.
Yeah.
The last place she's known to be is parked up on your road.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, which is obviously why you're in custody. So it's reasonable for us to think that you may know where she is.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So please, if you do know.
I don't, honestly.
Okay.
Burfield insists he has nothing to do with Katie's disappearance. His phone is seized and sent for digital analysis. DCI Alan Davies and his team turn their focus to searching the area, including Gisborne Forest.
With such a unique case in this rural area, it becomes a huge inquiry for that senior investigating officer. He's bringing in resources, quite rightly, from all sorts of places. Mountain rescue, he's got dogs, he's got drones and planes, everybody looking, because essentially Gisborne Forest, where that was the last place where they believe she may have been taken to, is a 25-mile radius. It's a huge area, and of course he needs to narrow down. He's not getting any help from Andrew Burfield about where she might be. He has an idea of the direction of the van was going in, but what happens when there's no CCTV, when there's no cell site information, and now he's just faced with the forest. So the next step he decides to do is, well, let's ramp up this media appeal.
The last sighting of Katie Kenyon was around 9:30 on Friday morning, when a woman matching her description was seen getting into a silver transit van with a man in Burnley.
That van had quite a distinctive panel on the side of it. It was a white van with a patched up area on the side.
Someone came forward and said, oh, we saw this van at this time parked up here. So that means that they can narrow down the search now, and they have this part of the forest where they can now look.
The media appeal results in a significant development in the investigation.
Andrew Burfield was a jobbing builder, but he turned up for a job in slightly unusual circumstances earlier than the occupiers of the home he was working on would have expected. And he engaged them in a slightly odd conversation, asking them when their bins were going to be emptied. That obviously raises some suspicions, and at that point, that bin is then searched, and under the homeowner's refuse, there is some stashed waste, if you like, and in that there are bags within bags, some of which have heavy blood staining, and Katie's flip-flops are in there as well.
Those items were fast-tracked through to check the DNA to find out whether that blood was, in fact, Katie's blood, as they suspected, and sadly, that came back positive.
Even when the blood is found in the bottom of that bin with her flip-flops and trainers, obviously that can heighten your fear that something might have happened, but you cannot lose hope until you have proof that she is no longer alive. And the officers will hold that thought process throughout to make sure that there is nothing that stops them from that continued overnight constant working at pace to try and find her alive. In a forest area of that size, there is every possibility that, yes, she may be very badly injured, but she may be alive, and there may be that possibility to save her.
Faced with mounting evidence against him, Burfield decides to speak to the police.
He realises now he's in a really difficult predicament, and that even if they haven't got a body at this stage, that there is now evidence that she has come to some kind of injury.
He changed his story quite drastically.
Burfield was about to reveal a story that would shock even the most hardened investigators. On 22nd April 2022, Katie Kenyon, a 33-year-old mother of two, disappeared without a trace in a rural part of Lancashire. Police investigated her on-off boyfriend, 51-year-old Andrew Burfield, after he was seen on CCTV driving Katie in his van, and blood-stained bags were located at his workplace. With the evidence mounting against him, Burfield decides it is time to tell police his version of the story.
Andrew Burfield has asked to be interviewed. Now, this is quite unusual because when somebody does that, you think, well, they've got something to say, and potentially you hope at that stage, maybe even a confession to say this is what's happened.
I believe that you want to speak to us today, so I'm just going to hand it over to you to tell us what you want to say.
We parked the van up and we went to our site, which we always go to. I say always, but we've been twice.
Right.
And that's where she's done it.
That's where she still is. Okay.
Andrew Burfield then comes up with this story to say, we were in this part of the forest, we went there for a picnic, but during that time there, Katie dared me to throw an axe that I had and knock a Coke can out of her hand. And of course, he's, for everybody listening to that at that particular point would be, well, that's just ridiculous. Why would somebody even ask you to do that? And of course, then when they go in to speak to him further, he says, well, I decided not to do that, so I threw it at a tree, but I accidentally threw it and it hit her. And that was kind of his story. It's an accidental death.
So we don't know what went wrong. You were aiming at the tree and...
No, I can't even say I slipped, fell, nothing. I just don't even know what went wrong. It's the stupidest thing. But I'll never do that. Something so stupid.
How close was she from you?
He then said that he was in the middle of the forest, there was no mobile phone reception to call for help, he was panicking, he didn't think that he was strong enough to lift Katie and take her to get medical assistance or take her anywhere.
There's no help there, you know, there's nothing.
No.
No people. There was signal on the phone, they can't carry her. Carry her. Sort of a boyfriend can't carry your own girlfriend.
Andrew Burfield continues to say that having thrown the axe and it's accidentally hit Katie, that he kind of, doesn't say he panicked, but what he does say is he went back to his van and he even considered killing himself at that point. But then he decides in his mind, as he told the officers, that he needs to get his finances straight first. So he then goes back to Katie's body, which he now believes to be dead, and buries her in a shallow grave.
I just don't know what I'm doing, honestly. I don't have covered in blood. I just go to her straight away.
The officers then are thinking, right, okay, then so where is it? Because what was clear is that they couldn't find something that fitted that description at all. This shallow grave, which would be a panic dig and then stuff thrown on top of it. But they couldn't see anything like that in the area where they had been focusing of where that van was last seen.
But they had helicopters up, they had dogs, they had officers searching the forest for this shallow grave, but they couldn't find it.
Andrew Burfield even tells the investigating officers this is exactly where it happened and where she is. Well, the officers are there at the scene and they can't find it. So there's something doesn't add up here. They're very curious as to where is she, because we would normally see something like this and it would be obvious to our search teams, to the dogs, all sorts of things. So obviously it's confusing for them. They don't know where she is and they still haven't found her.
They had all their top search people looking for this grave. I mean, it's horrific to think about. There's a young woman buried in the forest. They're going to use every resource that they've got for that, but it was so well hidden that they just couldn't find it.
They realise that effectively without his help, they're not going to be able to locate the exact site where she is because there is no evidence anywhere of the ground having been disturbed.
It's a few days later when they produce him from prison.
You do not have to say anything.
April 29th, 2022. Police have now been searching for 7 days for Katie Kenyon's body. As a last resort, police take Burfield out of custody and ask him to show them where he buried her.
Now take us to where you buried the body. Help us, because we can't find it.
I've never heard of the police taking somebody out to a gravesite like that before, but Burfield had done such a good job of hiding it that they were left with no other option. They needed to find Katie. They needed to get her a proper burial and the dignity that she deserved. And they also needed to get the evidence that they needed to convict her killer.
When you produce someone from prison, obviously there's an element of security that has to be in place. What you don't want is that prisoner running away for a start. So you have a sufficient number of officers there to produce him from prison in a secure van and take him to the area where you want to take him. But of course, those officers still talk about the fear that, he may become violent or, try and escape. But when you plan something like that, as the SIO did in this case, he's planned it so that that is not going to be a possibility. We have everything in place to make sure he's not going anywhere. The main focus that SIO had was the reason you're here is to tell us where that body is and you're not going anywhere.
Is it okay, that side where you sat?
Accompanied by police, Andrew Burfield gives exact directions to the burial site.
Follow this right to the top now to T-junction. About the mile is saying.
As Andrew Burfield is being driven to the forest to identify where he has buried Katie, you can see from the footage above what a beautiful countryside, what an idyllic place this is, and how incredibly unusual that something like this would happen in that area. But also, in matching against this beautiful countryside is this dark and morbid kind of thing that has happened. And it's, for people that live there and people that, consider that a lot of people have gone to retire to those sort of places, this would be a very shocking thing for their community. And then to come out, as he walks out of the van, to identify where a body is, what he has done to this person, where he has buried that body is a deeply shocking thing.
Sorry, what you say? That's where we're picnic.
This is where they picnicked.
Okay.
And then he suddenly sits down on the floor, crosses his legs, and it's that indication that this is where she is. Well, what was clear to the officers and the search teams there, some of these, people have done this before, are experts in this kind of thing, was that they couldn't see any makeshift shallow graves anywhere near he was sitting.
He was a builder, so he knew about digging holes, but it had been done with real precision.
Archaeologists subsequently said that the ground had effectively been relayed perfectly with clay, with soil, and then with topsoil.
Absolutely flat and looked untouched, and even the root of one of the trees that was growing there, he'd managed to weave that in without damaging it.
And of course that raised huge suspicions as to, well, that doesn't look like somebody who's panicked. Somebody who's panicked because they've accidentally killed somebody and they've just put them in a shallow grave and driven back really quickly in a matter of half an hour or 50 minutes. So even more suspicions that actually there must be some pre-planning in this.
Police begin to suspect that Katie's murder was premeditated.
In circumstances of this type of inquiry, you start to try and build a timeline that you can see almost down to the minute what is happening. And the officers, in this case, using the CCTV, using telephone calls, text messages, sightings, ANPR, all that kind of thing comes into your timeline to try and work out what's happened. And they also want to put that timeline against what Andrew Burfield is saying. Could he have done what he's done in the time that we can narrow him down to? And essentially where that starts is, at the moment he leaves his house in that van to the moment that van arrives back, which is 51 minutes. Now they start to work out, well, hang on a minute, let's look at what he says has happened. I get there, I park up, it's a certain amount of distance to walk to where they had a picnic. We then get the picnic out, we then do this thing with the axe where this accident happens. We then go back to my van, I then do this, I think about what I'm gonna do. I then go and dig a grave for an adult body, and then I dig it enough so that I can put the body in and throw stuff back over the top. It didn't fit at all. There's no way. And even the officers in the inquiry team there did almost a rerun to try and go through things that he says has happened, and worked out obviously straight away that it's impossible what he's done.
You have not dug that hole in the 10 minutes that you have said to us. It might have been longer. Right, okay.
I don't know how long we were there, do I? All I'm saying is I dug all that day.
We know how long you're there, and you're not long enough.
But they need to work out now this is premeditated. What has he done in the days preceding when he said he accidentally killed Katie?
This is a predator.
Lancashire police are investigating the kidnapping and suspected murder of 33-year-old mother Katie Kenyon. Her on-off boyfriend, 51-year-old Andrew Burfield, was arrested after blood-stained bags were found at his workplace. Burfield claims he accidentally killed Katie while playing a game involving an axe. 7 days later, after her disappearance, police have released him from custody to show them where he buried her, now suspecting the murder was premeditated.
The thing is, Andrew, you've told us a lot over the last few days, haven't you? And you've told us a lot, certainly today, a lot of information. And a lot of it just does not add up, okay? And ultimately, we don't believe you of what you've said. Okay? I do not believe that this has been an accident. This is about your control and your over Katie, and you're losing the control.
Police examine Burfield's movements in the days leading up to the murder.
One of the first things they see is CCTV the day before, the 21st of April, where he is seen clearly on CCTV borrowing a spade from his dad and putting it in that grey panel van with that distinctive black panel on the side. It helps to form that notion that perhaps he's gone and actually dug something beforehand. That does come to proof because what they do then is they then find CCTV of him the day before going to the forest to the exact same location. And on that particular occasion, this is where they believe he has dug in preparation for killing Katie.
The police told Burfield that they knew that he'd been in the forest the day before. He had to think on his feet, really. And the story that he came up with was that he just had new brakes put on his van and he needed to bed them in. So he'd been up to the forest, testing his brakes, took his dog for a walk the night before.
But the evidence at the crime scene told a different story.
As the crime scene itself is being examined by the forensic teams, they noticed two sets of footprints now in this grave that has been identified. One set of footprints has zigzags on, the other one is like a block print. So two sets of footprints don't match what Katie would have been wearing, either flip-flops or her trainers. So, you know, it indicates either two people there, which has to be a hypothesis for the investigating officer initially, or that someone has been there on two different occasions who owns two different pairs of shoes. What you could see on the CCTV footage the day before Katie was killed, when Andrew Burfield was collecting a spade from his father's address, was that he was wearing a certain type of trainer that has the zigzags on it. What they also found later on was that the block print of the print that was next to that grave matched his work boots that he also owned as a builder. So the indication then helped them again have that theory that he's been there before over two different occasions.
The body is taken in for an autopsy, where the extent of Katie's injuries are revealed.
When they took Katie's body off for a post-mortem, it was immediately apparent that he was lying. This was no accident. Katie had 12 different injuries to her head and some defensive injuries as well, where there'd been a struggle.
To the point where she's unrecognisable and the family don't even get to see her body because she's been too mutilated.
There was no way that was a game gone wrong.
Everything that he says has happened has been proved to not be true, proved to be impossible, proved to be a timeline of which his timeline is completely and utterly opposite to the CCTV, to the phones, to the ANPR, to the witness statements, to what he's done at the scene in this beautiful forest. You know, everything doesn't match up. The evidence tells you one story, Andrew Burfield is telling you a completely different story.
We're looking at a predatorial stalker here, a serial perpetrator, someone with no remorse whatsoever, someone with no empathy, someone who doesn't show any compassion to her children, to her mum, to her sisters, and he weaves this web of deceit remorselessly.
The more the police dig into Andrew Burfield's background, they identify previous girlfriends. And the situation that he had with them, the relationships he had with them were very similar, very controlling, a misogynist, very nasty person.
But what we also then find out is that he's on Tinder, he's on dating sites, he's been to places before where he knows that there is a woman who's living alone in a house and they need a builder. And he asks impertinent questions that ring alarm bells. So, are you living alone? Do you have a partner? Do you have a husband? And he needs this information in order to pick victims, because that's what he's doing. He's picking victims all the time to see how he can manipulate them.
There's evidence of him being a fantasist, a Walter Mitty type of character. He had potentially another relationship in Scotland with trips back and forth to Scotland. He claimed that he had a large property empire.
She even says that you had said that you were going to buy a house and that you've got a portfolio of a number of houses.
That's not relevant to this, I don't get it.
The way it's relevant is because it's about you, Andrew, and the fact that you have told lies, you tell lies to women, and you're manipulating these relationships to control, and you fantasise about a life that you would want to have.
That's not a crime, is it?
That's not a crime.
Is it?
Because we're building to the fact that this hasn't just happened on Friday, as you have tried to account for this morning. That what we're saying is that hasn't happened, okay?
Further evidence of his premeditation was discovered during the analysis of his phone.
And what they see there is a series weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before, where he is typing out responses of text messages premeditated to send to the children and family on his notes in his phone. And that he would then transfer them from notes into text messages on the day that he killed her or the days after. This was his plan. So they could see that all those things were written weeks before in preparation to give a full story as to where Katie might be.
Burfield left voicemails for Katie after he savagely murdered her in an attempt to deflect police attention from him.
You want me to go and get the dog today? No? Kids ringing me? I don't just let me know what's happening. I ain't got a clue. Please. I love you.
All these frantic things that he's doing around these messages and how he's supposed to be worried about her. 2 minutes later, they see on his phone, he's texting other women saying what a great day he's having, had a good day at work, and allegedly sitting there watching the football as well on TV. Of course, this builds a picture that this man has premeditated, he's done what he thinks. He now thinks he's done enough to throw everyone off the scent, and now he can relax. But obviously little does he know that actually what he's doing is he's creating more and more evidence for the police to narrow down on him as being the person that killed Katie.
Katie herself even had her concerns about you. She even told her own sister. And basically what she said to her sister was, if I go missing, it will be him, meaning you, who's done it.
On the basis of all of the evidence that they had, the police felt confident enough to charge him with murder.
The murder trial begins at Preston Crown Court in Lancashire on November 14th, 2022.
Interestingly, he wanted a trial, and that automatically makes you think the poor parents, the poor sisters, the poor children, they're going to have to listen to what happened to their loved one in graphic detail.
Burfield was sitting in the dock and his demeanour never changed throughout the whole thing. He had very much a poker face on. He wasn't going to give anything away by his body language, but as the prosecution case came out, point by point, it was almost jaw-dropping. The levels of manipulation that he was using, the control that he was holding over Katie, the gaslighting, it was... You just felt enormous sympathy for her. She must not have known where her head was at. And then when it came out that he'd planned all of this, this wasn't an argument that had got out of hand. He'd gone to great lengths to ensure that this happened. With the writing of the text messages, the digging of the grave, it was chilling. On the third day of the trial, we went to court and there was a huge delay. And when Burfield was brought into court, they asked for the charge to be put to him again. And at that point, Burfield pleaded guilty to murder.
Andrew Burfield changed his plea to guilty 3 days into his trial for killing Katie Kenyon, who was from Padiham. Burfield had claimed he killed Katie by accident. Yesterday, he changed his plea to guilty. The judge told the 51-year-old that he should prepare himself, that he might die in jail.
You know, it's often said in murder trials that, murder requires malice aforethought, some form of premeditation, but that premeditation can be formed in an instant before doing an act that is intended to kill or seriously injure somebody. Well, this is premeditation running back weeks and weeks at an absolute minimum and running over a pattern of behaviour where he has been coercive, controlling towards Katie and to others. So this is somebody that was effectively a ticking time bomb. I suppose, you know, if it hadn't been Katie Kenyon, it would have been somebody else. This was clearly a very, very dangerous, very sadistic, very cruel, and entirely lacking in empathy individual, because you look at the way that he tried to even deceive her family, you know, not even giving her family the kind of closure that they would have wanted, either quickly or even trying to maintain this fallacy that she was alive. It's disgusting.
His guilty plea was to save himself a little bit of time in prison. He doesn't care about anyone else.
The court was packed on the day of sentence. Everybody wanted to see justice served to this evil, evil man. Burfield came into the dock and he looked a little bit crestfallen, I suppose, like he had finally been caught. He wasn't getting away with this terrible thing that he planned.
Andrew Burfield is then sentenced to 32 years in prison, and that's a minimum term as well, because of the dangerousness that he poses to the public.
Burfield's life sentence is a relief for Katie's family, but it will not bring her back.
Katie Kenyon was a young woman who still had her whole life ahead of her. She should have been able to watch her children grow up. She should have been able to spend time in the community that she loved, you know, doing the simple pleasures that she seemed to adore, being out with family, being out with children, being out in the outdoors and nature.
Burfield robbed Katie of the chance to live a healthy, long life, to be around the children that she loves so dearly and all of her family. And the wider implications of this for her family and the community cannot be understated.
I didn't know Katie, but I got a feeling from her family and her friends and the photographs and everything that we'd seen that she seemed lovely. Burfield was chilling. To think of what she went through, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Andrew Burfield is a coercive and controlling, manipulative person, and is a very dangerous, very evil man. And the indignity that he showed to her in the relationship, you know, carried on with the indignity in the way that he treated her after death as well, you know, leaving her in his hope that she would never be found in a forest.
The Forest of Bowland is such a picturesque place. It's a real beauty spot. It's the last place that you would expect something so dark and chilling to take place.